The wolf's yellow eyes locked onto Evelyn's as her rifle clicked empty. No bullets left, nowhere to run. Blood from her sheep stained the Montana snow crimson while the pack circled closer, their breath forming death clouds in the frozen air. Then a stranger's gunshot split the night, dropping the alpha wolf instantly. But as the mysterious marksman collapsed into the blizzard, his own blood pooling beneath him, Evelyn faced an impossible choice: save the man who saved her or let the storm claim another victim. Welcome to a tale of survival, secrets, and redemption in the American frontier. Comment below where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far our story has traveled. The December wind howled across the Montana Valley, like a wounded animal driving sheets of snow against the weathered boards of Evelyn Carter's barn. She pressed her back against the rough timber wall, counting the remaining shells in her Winchester .3 left and 7 wolves still circling her bleeding sheep. The lantern hanging from a bent nail cast wild shadows across the carnage, making the blood on the snow look black as coal in the flickering light. "Easy, girl," she whispered to Clementine, her prize ewe, who bleated weakly from behind an overturned feed trough. The sheep's left flank had been torn open by the first wolf that had broken through the fence an hour ago. That one lay dead now. Evelyn's first shot true, but its pack had come for vengeance. The largest wolf, a gray beast with a scarred muzzle, stalked forward through the swirling snow. Its eyes reflected the lantern light like golden coins, never blinking, never wavering from Evelyn's face. She'd seen this one before. The locals called him Old Testament, said he'd killed more livestock in the valley than all the other predators combined. Her father had tried to hunt him 3 times before the consumption took him last spring. "You want my sheep?" Evelyn's voice cracked raw from shouting and the bitter cold. "You'll have to go through me first." She raised the rifle sighting down the barrel with hands that had grown steady from 3 years of living alone on this land. 3 years since her mother died in childbirth, along with the baby brother who never drew breath. 6 months since her father joined them, leaving her with nothing but debt, 60 head of sheep, and a determination to prove everyone wrong who said a woman couldn't run a ranch alone. The wolf paused, its massive head tilting as if considering her words. Behind it, the pack spread out in a half circle, cutting off any escape route to the cabin 50 yards away. Smart. They hunted like they thought, like they planned. Her father always said wolves were devils dressed in fur, but Evelyn saw intelligence in those golden eyes, cold, calculating intelligence that made them far more dangerous than any demon. She squeezed the trigger. The shot went wide, sparking off a fence post. The wolves didn't even flinch. 2 shots left. "Damn it all to hell," she muttered, her father's curse feeling strange on her lips even after all these months. The wind picked up, driving snow horizontal across the barnyard. She could barely see 10 feet now. The wolves were shadows moving through shadows, and Clementine's breathing was getting shallower behind her. The scarred wolf lunged. Evelyn fired without thinking, pure instinct guiding her aim. The bullet caught the beast in the shoulder, spinning it sideways, but it kept coming. She tried to work the lever for her last shot, but her frozen fingers fumbled. The rifle slipped from her grasp, disappearing into the snow at her feet. Time slowed to honey. The wolf's jaws opened wide, strings of saliva gleaming in the lantern light. Evelyn could see every tooth worn and yellow, but still sharp enough to tear through her throat like paper. She reached for the skinning knife at her belt, knowing it was too little too late. The gunshot came from somewhere beyond the veil of snow, the sound different from her Winchester, deeper, more authoritative. The wolf's head snapped back, a red rose blooming between its eyes. It dropped 3 feet from where Evelyn stood, its body twitching once before going still. Another shot, another wolf down, then rapid fire, boom, 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 each report precise and deadly. The remaining wolves scattered into the storm, their howls fading into the distance. In less than 10 seconds, it was over. Evelyn stood frozen, her knife half-drawn, heart hammering against her ribs. A figure materialized from the blizzard, tall and broad-shouldered, carrying a rifle she didn't recognize. Something military with a longer barrel than any hunting rifle she'd seen. "Ma'am?" the stranger said, touching the brim of his hat with his free hand. "You hurt." Before she could answer, he swayed. The rifle dropped from his hands, and she saw what the darkness and snow had hidden. His entire left side was soaked with blood, the fabric of his coat torn in 3 parallel lines. "Christ," Evelyn breathed. "The wolves got you." "No, ma'am," he managed, dropping to one knee. "This This is from earlier. Different trouble. Then he pitched forward into the snow, and Evelyn was left standing over an unconscious stranger who'd saved her life, blood pooling beneath him, the storm growing stronger by the minute. She should leave him. That was the smart thing, the safe thing. A woman alone didn't invite strange men into her home, especially not men who showed up bloody from different trouble. But he'd saved her life, saved Clementine too, most likely, and leaving him here meant death as certain as those wolf fangs would have been. "Damn it," she said again, already moving to grab him under the arms. He was heavier than he looked, solid muscle beneath the wet coat. Damn it all to hell and back. She managed to drag him the 10 feet to the barn door, grunting with effort. Clementine bleated weakly as they passed, and Evelyn made a mental note to tend to the sheep after she dealt with the man. If she could stop his bleeding. If she could get him warm. If her life had become nothing but ifs since her father died. The barn was warmer than outside, though not by much. She pulled the stranger onto a pile of relatively clean hay near the back wall away from the door and the wind that snuck through every crack. In the lantern light, she could see his face properly for the first time. Angular features softened by a week's worth of beard, dark hair shot through with premature gray at the temples. Younger than she'd first thought, maybe 35 to her 24 years. His coat was ruined, the thick wool shredded from left shoulder to hip. Beneath it, his shirt was soaked through with blood. Evelyn had seen plenty of injuries on the ranch horses, kicked cattle, gored her father's various mishaps with tools and wire, but this was different. These were claw marks, deep and deliberate. "What in God's name were you tangling with?" she muttered, using her skinning knife to cut away the ruined shirt. The wounds were worse than she'd thought, 3 deep furrows that had been bleeding for a while based on how pale he was. But they weren't wolf marks, she knew, wolf marks. These were different. Bigger. Bear, maybe. Though what he'd been doing fighting a bear in December was beyond her. She needed supplies from the cabin, clean cloth, the bottle of whiskey her father kept for medicinal purposes, needle and thread. But that meant leaving him here bleeding and crossing 50 yards of open ground in a blizzard with wolves possibly still lurking. Clementine first. She decided moving to where the injured ewe lay. The wound on the sheep's flank was bad, but not fatal if treated quickly. She'd learned veterinary skills by necessity patching up animals, because the nearest vet was 2 days' ride away in Billings. Using strips torn from her petticoat, she bound Clementine's wound tight enough to stop the bleeding. The stranger groaned, his eyes fluttering open. They were gray. She noticed the color of the storm outside. "Don't move," Evelyn said, pressing a hand to his shoulder when he tried to sit up. "You've lost a lot of blood." "The wolves. Gone. You saw to that." She studied his face, looking for signs of fever or delirium. "What's your name?" "Jonathan." He winced, pressing a hand to his side. "Jonathan Mercer." "Well, Mr. Mercer, you've got yourself 3 nasty gashes that need tending. I have to get supplies from my cabin. Can you hold on for a few minutes?" He nodded, though she could see the effort it cost him. "Military?" he asked, gesturing weakly at how she'd bound Clementine's wound. "Frontier," she corrected. "When you're alone out here, you learn or you die." "Seems like you've learned well." She stood, checking the load in the stranger's rifle, a Spencer repeating rifle military issue from the war. 7 shots remaining. "Let's hope I've learned well enough to keep us both alive through this storm." The journey to the cabin was the longest 50 yards of Evelyn's life. The wind tried to tear her off her feet, snow blinding her until she navigated more by memory than sight. She kept the Spencer rifle ready, scanning for any sign of the wolf pack, but they seemed to have truly fled. Inside the cabin, she grabbed everything she could carry: bandages, whiskey, her father's surgical kit that he'd bought off a traveling doctor, extra blankets, and the pot of stew that had been simmering on the stove. When she returned to the barn, Jonathan had managed to prop himself against the wall, his face gray as his eyes. "Thought you might have reconsidered," he said. "I don't abandon people who save my life," Evelyn replied, setting down her supplies. "This is gonna hurt. Can't hurt worse than getting them." She uncorked the whiskey. "Want to tell me what really did this? Because it wasn't wolves, and we both know it." He was quiet for a moment, then, "Bear. Surprised it. Down by Copper Creek." Took exception to me being in its territory. In December, most bears are hibernating. Most bears, he hissed as she poured whiskey over the wounds. This one wasn't. She didn't press further, focusing on cleaning the gashes. They were deep but clean, no sign of infection yet. The middle one was the worst, going almost to the ribs. She threaded her father's curved needle with silk thread, grateful he'd insisted on buying the good supplies, even when money was tight. "You've done this before," Jonathan observed through gritted teeth as she began stitching. "Plenty of times, though usually on sheep and horses." Flattering comparison. Despite everything, she found herself almost smiling. "Hold still. This is the deep one." He grabbed a handful of hay knuckles, white as she worked. To his credit, he didn't cry out, though she could see the muscles in his jaw working. The stitching took 20 minutes, careful work by lantern light, while the storm raged outside. When she was done, she wrapped his entire torso in clean bandages, then helped him into one of her father's shirts she'd brought from the cabin. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. "Most people would have left me." Most people didn't just have their life saved by a stranger with a Spencer rifle. She sat back on her heels, studying him. "You military was Union Army, scout mostly. The war's been over near 20 years. Some wars don't end when the treaties are signed." She understood that. Her own war against the bank, against the weather, against everyone who said she couldn't make it alone, that war continued every day. "You can stay in the barn tonight," she said, gathering up the bloody rags. "Storm should break by morning, then you can be on your way." "I'd be obliged." He shifted, wincing. "Your sheep, Clementine, she needs watching tonight. Infection risk." "You were listening." "Hard not to. You talk to your animals like they're people. Out here, they're better company than most people." He studied her for a moment, those gray eyes uncomfortably perceptive. "How long have you been alone here?" "That's none of your business, Mr. Mercer." "Jonathan, and you're right, it's not. But I know what alone looks like. Wear it like a coat for long enough and it starts to show." She stood abruptly. "I'll bring you some stew and more blankets. Try not to tear those stitches." Outside the barn, she leaned against the door, letting the cold wind blast the heat from her cheeks. She didn't need some stranger reading her like a book. Seeing the loneliness she worked so hard to hide. Tomorrow he'd be gone and she'd be alone again. That was how it needed to be. But the storm didn't break by morning. If anything, it got worse. Evelyn woke to find 3 feet of fresh snow blocking her cabin door. She had to climb out through a window just to get to the barn, fighting through drifts that came up to her waist. Inside, she found Jonathan fever-hot and delirious, muttering about devils and debts and someone named Catherine. "No, no," she said, pressing a hand to his burning forehead. "Don't you dare die on me now." She spent the next 3 days fighting for his life. The fever raged, turning his skin furnace hot, then leaving him shaking with chills. She spooned broth between his cracked lips, changed his bandages every few hours, and talked to him constantly about anything, everything, just to keep him anchored to the world. "My father used to say I could talk the paint off a barn," she told him during one of the worst nights when his breathing had gone shallow and she wasn't sure he'd make it to dawn. Of course, he also said I was too stubborn for my own good. Guess he was right about that, considering I'm sitting here trying to save a stranger who won't even tell me what really gave him those wounds. On the 3rd night, the fever broke. Jonathan's eyes opened clear and focused for the first time since the morning after he'd arrived. "Evelyn," he said, and she realized she must have told him her name during one of her monologues. "Welcome back." She helped him sit up, noting with relief that his color was better. "You've been out for 3 days. The storm. Still going. We're snowed in proper now. Haven't seen anything like this since the winter of '79. He looked around the barn, taking in the makeshift living space she'd created, a small stove she'd dragged in from the equipment shed, pallets arranged as beds, her supplies organized neatly along one wall. "You've been staying out here easier than trudging back and forth through the snow. Besides, someone had to keep you from dying." "Why?" The question was soft, genuinely curious. "You don't know me. I could be anyone, could be dangerous." She was quiet for a moment, then, "My father raised me to pay my debts. You saved my life. That means something." Most people would say saving them from wolves just makes us even for you saving me after. I'm not most people. No, he agreed. You're not. They fell into an odd rhythm over the next days as the storm continued. Jonathan was weak, but improving, able to sit up and even walk a little with help. He proved useful despite his injuries, helping her tend to Clementine and the other sheep she'd managed to save. He had a way with animals gentle and patient that surprised her. You weren't always a soldier, she observed, watching him coax a skittish ewe to take grain from his hand. No, I was a carpenter first. Learned from my father back in Pennsylvania. Built houses, barns, furniture, honest work. What changed? The war changed everything for everyone, didn't it? She couldn't argue with that. The war had taken her two older brothers before she was even old enough to understand what war meant. Her parents never recovered from those losses, she thought. It shaped everything that came after. You mentioned someone, she said carefully, when you were feverish. Catherine. His hand stilled on the ewe's head. My wife. She died. Childbirth 8 years ago. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. But she could see it wasn't, not really. Grief like that didn't care about time. She knew because she carried her own for her parents, for the life she'd planned before circumstances forced her into this isolated existence. What brings you to Montana? She asked, changing the subject. Pennsylvania's a long way off. Work. I take jobs where I can find them, building mostly, but sometimes other things. Other things like fighting bears in December. He almost smiled. Something like that. She didn't press. Everyone out here had secrets, things they'd rather leave buried. As long as his didn't bring trouble to her door, she could respect his privacy. But trouble came anyway, just not the kind she'd expected. On the 5th day, when the storm had finally started to weaken, she heard horses outside. Multiple horses, which meant either very brave or very desperate visitors. She grabbed her Winchester, noting that Jonathan had already picked up his Spencer. Miss Carter, a voice called. Miss Evelyn Carter, it's Malcolm Blackwell from the bank. Shit, Evelyn muttered. Shit. Problem, Jonathan asked. The worst kind. The kind that wears a suit and carries a ledger. She opened the barn door to find 3 men on horseback. Blackwell in his city coat looking miserable in the cold, and 2 men she recognized as hired muscle from town. Grady and Parsons, men who did dirty work for whoever paid best. Miss Carter, Blackwell said, not bothering to dismount. I've come to discuss your situation. My situation is fine, Mr. Blackwell. Your situation is 3 months behind on loan payments. Your father left considerable debts, and the bank has been patient, but the bank will get its money when I sell wool come spring. Blackwell's smile was thin as paper. I'm afraid spring is too late. However, I'm prepared to make you an offer. Sell me the land now and I'll forgive the debt entirely. You can even stay on as a tenant farmer if you wish. This land isn't for sale. Everything is for sale, Miss Carter. It's just a matter of price. His eyes shifted to Jonathan, who had stepped into view. I wasn't aware you had company. I wasn't aware that was any of your business. Blackwell's expression hardened. Perhaps your friend should know what kind of situation he's gotten himself into. This land sits on the proposed railway route. The Northern Pacific needs it, and they will have it one way or another. The railway route was settled 2 years ago, Jonathan said quietly. 20 miles north of here. Everyone turned to look at him. Blackwell's eyes narrowed. And you would know this how... I worked on the survey crew. The route you're talking about was rejected because of the grade. Too steep for heavy freight. Plans change. Geography doesn't. The 2 men stared at each other for a long moment. Evelyn saw something pass between them, some kind of recognition or understanding that made her stomach knot. I don't believe we've been introduced, Blackwell said. No need. You'll be leaving now. Is that a threat? It's weather advice. Another storm's coming. You can smell it on the wind. You stay much longer, you'll be spending the night, and I don't think Miss Carter has room for 3 more guests. Blackwell smiled coldly. We'll be back, Miss Carter. The bank wants its money, and the railroad wants its land. Neither is known for patience. He turned his horse. Gentlemen, They rode away, but not before Grady gave Jonathan a long, measuring look that promised this wasn't over. When they were gone, Evelyn turned to Jonathan. You really work on the survey crew. 3 years ago, yes? And the railway route? Is 20 miles north, like I said. Blackwell is lying about the railroad wanting your land. Then why does he want it? Jonathan was quiet for a moment. I don't know. But men like him don't go to this much trouble for no reason. That night Evelyn couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Blackwell's visit, about the threat in his words. Her father had borrowed money to buy more sheep to expand the operation. He'd been so sure it would pay off. Then he got sick and the sheep got parasites and everything went to hell. She found Jonathan sitting up cleaning his rifle by lamplight. Can't sleep either, she asked. Habit. Sleep too deep for too long, you might not wake up. That's a cheerful thought. It's a practical one. He looked up at her. Blackwell will be back. I know. What will you do? What I've been doing? Survive? Make it to spring, sell the wool, pay the debt. And if he doesn't give you until spring, she didn't answer because she didn't have an answer. If Blackwell called in the loan now, she'd lose everything. I could help, Jonathan said quietly. You've done enough. Soon as you're healed, you need to move on. This isn't your fight. Maybe not. But I don't like bullies and I don't like liars. Blackwell is both. You know him. I know the type. Saw plenty during the war and after. Men who use law and paper to steal what they couldn't take with guns. She sat down across from him, studying his face in the lamplight. What aren't you telling me about the bear, about why you're really here? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, the bear wasn't a bear. It was a man, or 3 men, rather. They jumped me down by Copper Creek, wanted information about something I don't have. We disagreed, violently. And you won. I survived. Sometimes that's the same thing. Who were they? Don't know. They didn't introduce themselves before they started cutting. She could tell there was more, but she also recognized the wall he'd put up. The same kind of wall she had around her own secrets and griefs. Thank you, she said, for telling me that much. You deserve to know what kind of trouble you might have invited in. Mr. Mercer, Jonathan Trouble was already here. You just gave it a different face. The storm did come just as Jonathan had predicted. Another 3 days of snow and wind trapping them in the barn together. But this time it felt different. They talked more, sharing stories of their pasts, carefully edited but real nonetheless. He told her about learning carpentry from his father, about building homes for families starting new lives. She told him about growing up on the frontier, about her mother teaching her to read from the Bible, and whatever books traveling merchants carried. She learned that he whittled when his hands needed occupation, creating tiny animals from scraps of wood. He learned that she knew the medicinal properties of every plant that grew in the valley. Knowledge passed down from her grandmother, who'd learned it from the natives. You're not what I expected, he said one evening, watching her prepare a poultice for Clementine's wound. What did you expect? I don't know. Someone harder, maybe. Frontier women have that reputation. I am hard when I need to be. No, he said thoughtfully. You're strong. There's a difference. Hard breaks. Strong bends, but doesn't break. She felt heat rise in her cheeks and busied herself with the poultice. You're not what I expected either. What did you expect? From a man who carries a military rifle and fights off 3 attackers despite being wounded. Someone more brutal. I can be brutal when I need to be. But you'd rather build than destroy. Wouldn't most people? No, she said, thinking of Blackwell, of the men who'd killed her brothers in a war that solved nothing of all the casual cruelty she'd witnessed in her 24 years. Most people find destroying easier. By the time the second storm passed, Jonathan's wounds had healed enough that he could move without pain. The stitches would need to stay in for another week, but he was functional. He helped her dig out paths between the buildings, repair damage to the chicken coop, and tend to the animals. It felt natural working beside him. Too natural. She had to remind herself that he was temporary, that as soon as the roads were clear, he'd leave and she'd be alone again. That was how it had to be. But then she found him in the barn one morning, studying the support beams with a critical eye. These are going to give out, he said. Probably this winter if we get another heavy snow like the last 2. See how they're bowing. She looked up, noticing for the first time the way the beams curved under the weight. Pa always said he'd reinforce them come summer. Summer's too late. That beam fails, you'll lose half your flock and maybe yourself if you're in here when it happens. I can't afford. I'm not talking about money. I can fix it. There's enough good timber in that fallen pine by the creek. Take me maybe 3 days if the weather holds. I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking. I'm offering. Consider it payment for room and board. You saved my life. You don't owe me anything. Maybe I want to do it anyway. She looked at him. Really looked at him. There was something in his eyes she couldn't quite read. Something that made her heart beat faster and her mouth go dry. Why? He asked. Because I'm good at building things. Because it needs doing. Because... He paused, seemed to wrestle with something. Then, because I haven't felt useful in a long time, and this makes me feel useful. She understood that. The need to matter to make a difference, even in small ways. All right, but I help. This is my barn. Wouldn't have it any other way. They worked together for 3 days straight, cutting timber, hauling it up from the creek, Jonathan showing her how to notch the joints properly so they'd bear weight without nails. His hands were sure and skilled, and she found herself watching them more than she should, noticing the way they moved with practiced efficiency, the careful strength in them. You miss it, she said on the second day as he planed a beam smooth. Building things. Every day. Why don't you go back to it? Can't build a life on a foundation of ghosts. She wanted to ask what he meant, but the pain in his voice stopped her. Instead, she said, maybe you just need new ground to build on. He looked at her, then really looked at her, and she felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. Maybe, he said softly. That night she found a letter in his saddlebags. She hadn't meant to snoop. She'd been looking for his spare shirt to mend a tear she'd noticed, and the letter had fallen out. It was addressed to him in shaky handwriting, and the first line caught her eye before she could stop herself. Jonathan, if you're reading this, then I'm dead, and you're the only one I can trust with the truth about Samuel Carter's daughter. Samuel Carter. Her father. Her hands shook as she held the letter. She should put it back, pretend she never saw it. But her father's name, the mention of truth, the fact that Jonathan had come here to their remote valley just as she needed saving. It's not what you think. She spun to find Jonathan in the doorway, his expression unreadable. You knew my father. I knew of him. We had mutual acquaintances. Don't. Her voice was sharp as the winter wind. Don't stand there and lie to me. Not after these weeks. Not after I saved your life. Not after... She stopped, unable to finish. He stepped into the room, moving slowly like she was a spooked horse. You're right. You deserve the truth. I wanted to be sure first. Sure of what? That you were really his daughter. That you were who he said you were. Who else would I be? Jonathan took a deep breath. Read the letter. All of it. Then we'll talk. With trembling fingers she unfolded the paper fully. The writing was her father's, though shakier than she remembered, probably written near the end when the sickness had taken most of his strength. Jonathan, if you're reading this, then I'm dead, and you're the only one I can trust with the truth about Samuel Carter's daughter. You don't know me well, but we met once during the war when you were scouting for Sherman, and I was with the medical corps. You saved my life at Antietam when you could have left me to die. I never forgot that. I've kept track of you over the years through mutual friends. I know about Catherine, about what you've been through. I know you're a good man who's lost his way. Maybe helping my daughter will help you find it again. Evelyn doesn't know the truth about her birth. Her mother and I agreed it was safer that way. But with me gone, she needs to know, and she needs protection. The land our ranch sits on is worth more than anyone realizes. There's a reason I borrowed so much to keep it a reason beyond sheep and grass. Evelyn's birth mother wasn't my Mary, though Mary loved her like her own. Her real mother was a Cherokee woman named Susan Crow Feather, a healer who saved my life when I was near death from fever in '59. We loved each other, though we couldn't be together. Not then, not in this world. When Susan died giving birth, she made me promise to raise Evelyn away from the reservation to give her a chance at a different life. But Susan's people, they knew things about this land. Sacred things. Medicine things. There's a cave system in the hills behind our ranch where plants grow that shouldn't exist this far north plants, with properties that could revolutionize medicine. Susan's grandmother showed them to her, and Susan showed them to me. I've kept the secret all these years, but others suspect. Malcolm Blackwell's father was a doctor in the army with me. He heard Susan talking in her fever dreams about the sacred medicine cave. He's been trying to find it ever since. If Blackwell gets the land, he'll destroy everything sacred about it. Sell the knowledge to the highest bidder. Evelyn needs to know who she is, what she's protecting, and she needs help protecting it. I know I have no right to ask this of you, but I'm desperate. Go to her. Tell her the truth. Help her if you can. The certificate of birth with Susan's name is hidden in my study behind the false back of the bottom desk drawer. The map to the caves is with it, drawn in Susan's hand. Save my daughter Jonathan. Save the legacy her real mother died protecting. Samuel Carter. The letter fell from Evelyn's numb fingers. The room spun. Everything she thought she knew about herself, about her family, about her life, all of it built on a foundation of lies. "It's not true," she whispered. "It can't be." But even as she said it, pieces clicked into place. Her facility with herbs that her mother Mary had always said was unusual, the way her father would sometimes look at her with such sadness, her darker complexion that never quite matched her supposed parents' fair skin, the dream she'd always had of a woman singing to her in a language she didn't understand. "Evelyn," Jonathan's voice was gentle. "I'm sorry. I wanted to tell you differently, not like this. You came here for this, not by accident. Yes and no. I was coming here, but the men who attacked me were Blackwells. They must have suspected something followed me. I fought them off, but was hurt. Finding your ranch when I did that was providence or luck, or maybe your mother's spirit guiding me. I don't know." She laughed, but it came out cracked. "My mother, which one, the one who raised me or the one whose blood I carry?" "Both loved you. That's clear. Is it because lying to someone their entire life doesn't feel like love?" She stood abruptly, needing to move, to run, to do something, with the energy crackling through her veins. But Jonathan caught her arm gently. "Your father was trying to protect you. The world isn't kind to mixed-blood children, especially not 20 years ago. And what's your excuse for lying?" "I wanted to be sure you were safe first. Blackwell has been watching. If he knew you knew about the caves. She pulled free of his grip. "These magical medicine caves that my Indian mother apparently died to protect. How very convenient. How very much like a story. It's not a story. I can show you." "No." She backed toward the door. "No, I need to think. I need to be alone." She fled into the night, not caring about the cold or the snow or anything but the need to escape the truth that threatened to shatter everything she thought she was. The graveyard was a quarter-mile from the house, a small fenced area where 3 generations of Carters lay, or who she'd thought were Carters. Her father's grave was the freshest, the wooden cross still pale and unweathered. Her mother's, Mary's, lay beside it, and the small marker for the baby brother who'd never lived. Except now she wondered if that was true either. If her whole life was a lie, why not that too? She fell to her knees in the snow beside her father's grave, anger and grief warring in her chest. "Why?" she asked. "The silent wood. Why couldn't you just tell me? Did you think I was too weak, too fragile? I've been running this ranch alone, fighting off wolves and bankers and loneliness, and you didn't think I could handle the truth about who I am." The wind whispered through the pines, and for a moment she could swear she heard something else. A woman's voice singing low and mournful in a language she didn't recognize but somehow understood in her bones. "Stop it," she told herself. "You're imagining things." But when she opened her eyes, Jonathan was standing at the graveyard gate holding a lantern. The light caught the snowflakes falling between them, making them look like stars. "You shouldn't be out here," he said. "It's starting to storm again." "Good. Maybe it'll bury me along with all these lies. Your father loved you. That wasn't a lie. How would you know? Because he went to extraordinary lengths to protect you even after death. Because he tracked down a stranger he'd met once during the war and trusted him with his most precious secret. Because every word in that letter bleeds love and fear for you." She stood slowly, her legs numb from kneeling in the snow. "And you, why did you really come? Don't tell me it was just because a dying man asked you to. Jonathan was quiet for a moment. Then, I came because I've been drifting since Catherine died. 8 years of taking whatever work I could find, never staying anywhere long enough to matter. Your father's letter gave me purpose, something to build instead of destroy, someone to save instead of fail. I don't need saving. No, he agreed. You don't. You're the strongest person I've met in years, but maybe you need someone to stand beside you when the fight comes, because it will come. Blackwell won't give up. Because of these supposed caves. Because of what's in them. Do you want to see the map your father mentioned we could go tomorrow if the storm clears? She looked back at the graves, then at Jonathan. This stranger who'd appeared in her life at just the right moment, who'd saved her from wolves and helped her shore up her barn, and now offered her truth she wasn't sure she wanted. If this is real, she said slowly, if I'm really what that letter says, what does that make me? It makes you exactly who you've always been. Evelyn Carter, who runs a sheep ranch alone and fights off wolf packs and tells bankers to go to hell. The only difference is now you know where your strength really comes from. The morning came gray and bitter with new snow falling in thick curtains that obscured the mountains. Evelyn hadn't slept, spending the night searching through her father's study with trembling hands. She found the false bottom in the desk drawer exactly where the letter said it would be, and inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were documents that rewrote her entire existence. The birth certificate bore her name, but listed Susan Crow Feather as her mother. There was a daguerreotype too faded and worn, showing a young Cherokee woman with eyes that looked exactly like the ones Evelyn saw in her own mirror every morning. The map was drawn on deerskin marked with symbols she couldn't read, but somehow felt familiar, like echoes of dreams she'd forgotten upon waking. Jonathan found her there as dawn broke, surrounded by the debris of her search. He set a cup of coffee beside her without speaking, and she was grateful for both the warmth and the silence. This changes everything. She finally set her voice hoarse from crying she hadn't realized she'd been doing. Does it? You're still the same person who was ready to fight off a wolf pack with 3 bullets. The same person who saved my life when you had every reason to leave me in the snow. But I'm not who I thought I was. My whole life people looked at me different, and I thought it was because I was a woman trying to run a ranch alone. But maybe they knew. Maybe they could see what I couldn't. People see what they expect to see, and what does it matter what they think? She held up the map, the deerskin soft as silk despite its age. This matters. If Blackwell knows about this, if he's after whatever my birth mother protected, then I can't just pretend it doesn't exist. Then we go look. Today, before the snow gets worse. You think I'm letting you go alone? Those men who attacked me are still out there, and Blackwell will have others. Besides, someone needs to watch your back while you're discovering your heritage. She wanted to refuse to insist she could handle it alone, like she'd handled everything else. But the truth was she was glad he was there. The revelation of her parentage had shaken her foundation, and having Jonathan's steady presence kept her from feeling completely untethered. They saddled the horses after checking on the sheep, Evelyn choosing her father's steadfast mare, while Jonathan took the stallion she'd been trying to break for months. The horse responded to him immediately, and she wondered if animals could sense the same quiet strength in him that she'd come to rely on these past weeks. The map led them up into the hills behind the ranch, following game trails that were barely visible under the snow. The symbols on the deerskin seemed to correspond to landmarks, a distinctive rock formation here, a twisted pine there. Susan Crow Feather had been thorough in her markings, creating a path that could be followed even decades later. Your father must have come up here, Jonathan observed, pointing to old blazes on some trees, marks that were clearly years old but deliberately made. He used to disappear sometimes, Evelyn remembered. Said he was checking trap lines, but he never brought back much game. Mother Mary would get upset about it. He was keeping the secret, protecting it. They climbed higher, the horses laboring through deepening snow. The wind picked up, driving ice crystals against their faces. Evelyn pulled her scarf higher, but her eyes remained fixed on the path ahead. Something was calling to her, a pull she couldn't explain, like recognition of a place she'd never been, but always known. There, Jonathan said, suddenly, pointing to a rock face that looked solid until you saw it from just the right angle. There was an opening, narrow and partially concealed by a fall of icicles, but definitely an entrance. They dismounted, tying the horses to a sturdy pine. Evelyn approached the cave mouth slowly, her heart pounding. The air coming from within was different, warmer, with a smell of earth and growing things that shouldn't exist in the dead of winter. "Let me go first," Jonathan said, but she shook her head. "This is my inheritance, apparently. My blood right." The words felt strange on her tongue, but also true. The passage was narrow at first, forcing them to squeeze sideways in places. Jonathan had brought a lantern, and its light danced across walls that showed signs of working tool marks that were older than any white settlement in the area. Then the passage opened up and Evelyn's breath caught. The cavern was massive, stretching up into darkness beyond the lantern's reach. But it wasn't the size that stunned her, it was the green. Plants grew everywhere, impossible plants that should have been dead in December's grip. Vines cascaded down the walls, their leaves broad and healthy. Flowers bloomed in clusters, their petals colors she'd never seen in nature, and the air was warm, humid, like stepping into summer. "Hot springs," Jonathan said, pointing to where water bubbled up from the floor in natural pools. "They must keep the temperature constant, but these plants—" Evelyn moved forward as if in a dream, her fingers brushing leaves that felt familiar, even though she'd never seen them before. Knowledge flickered at the edge of her consciousness, words, in a language she didn't speak but somehow understood. This one for fever. That one for wounds that won't heal. The purple flowers for women in childbirth. "I know them," she whispered. "I don't know how, but I know what they do." "Blood memory," Jonathan said quietly. "The Cherokee believe knowledge passes through bloodlines, especially for medicine keepers." She turned to look at him. "How do you know about Cherokee beliefs?" "I've traveled a lot since Catherine died. Spent some time with different tribes, learning, trying to understand things. Loss mostly. Different ways of seeing the world." She touched a vine with pale blue flowers, and suddenly she was somewhere else, or somewhen else. A woman who looked like the daguerreotype stood in this same spot, teaching a young girl about the plants. The girl's hand was small and brown, reaching up to touch the same flowers. Then the vision shifted, and it was Evelyn's father, young and desperate, carrying a woman who was bleeding, dying. The woman with Evelyn's eyes. She gasped, pulling her hand back, and found Jonathan steadying her. "What happened?" I think I saw my mother. Both of them. This place, it holds memories somehow." Before he could respond, they heard horses outside. Multiple horses and voices that carried even through the rock. "Saw them come this way. Tracks are fresh. Blackwell." Evelyn recognized his voice immediately. Jonathan was already moving, pulling her deeper into the cave. "Is there another way out?" She didn't know how she knew, but she did. "Yes, further back. The water has to go somewhere." They moved quickly but carefully through the garden cave, past pools of steaming water that reflected their lantern like mirrors. Behind them, they could hear men entering the passage, Blackwell's voice echoing off the walls. "I know you're in here, Miss Carter, or should I say Miss Crow Feather? Oh yes, I know the truth about you. My father kept excellent records." They reached the back of the main cavern, where the spring water formed a stream that disappeared into another passage. This one was partially flooded, the water knee-deep and surprisingly warm. "We'll have to wade," Evelyn said. "Better than the alternative." They plunged in the lantern held high to keep it dry. The passage was lower here, forcing them to bend, sometimes crawl through spaces where the water nearly filled the tunnel. Evelyn's skirts were soaked heavy, dragging at her. Behind them they could hear splashing. Their pursuers had found the water passage. "Faster," Jonathan urged, and then suddenly they were out, emerging behind a waterfall that she recognized, Blessing Falls, 2 miles from her ranch. They'd somehow traveled that far underground. But Blackwell's men had horses, and they'd figure out where the passage emerged soon enough. Jonathan grabbed her hand, pulling her along the icy creek bank. "We need to get to defensible ground," he said. "Your ranch—" "They'll expect that. There's an old line shack a mile east. My father used it during calving season." They ran through the snow, Evelyn's wet skirts freezing in the cold air, making movement even harder. She could hear horses, now shouts. A gunshot cracked through the air, the bullet sparking off a rock near Jonathan's head. He spun his Spencer rifle, coming up smooth and fast. The return fire was precise, one shot, one rider down. The others scattered for cover. "Go!" he shouted, firing again to keep their pursuers' heads down. The lined shack appeared through the trees, a small, sturdy structure built to withstand brutal winters. They burst through the door, Jonathan immediately moving to block it with a heavy wooden bar. The shack had been built for defense, narrow windows that could serve as gun ports, thick walls, supplies laid in for long sieges by weather. "How many bullets do you have?" Evelyn asked, checking her Winchester. "Maybe 20 rounds. You, 15. Not enough if they decide to wait us out." Through the window, they could see Blackwell's men spreading out, taking positions behind trees and rocks. Blackwell himself stayed back protected. "Miss Carter," he called, "this doesn't have to end in bloodshed. Sign over the land and we all walk away." "Go to hell," she shouted back. "That's not very ladylike. But then I suppose you're not really a lady, are you? Half-breed daughters of Indian witches rarely are." The slur hit like a physical blow, but Jonathan's hand on her shoulder steadied her. "Don't let him bait you. He wants you angry, not thinking." "I am angry." "Good. Use it, but use it smart." She looked around the shack inventory forming in her mind. Her father had left supplies here, food, ammunition, medical supplies. And something else, something he'd insisted on despite her mother's protests, dynamite for clearing rock slides. "Jonathan," she said slowly, "how do you feel about evening the odds?" He followed her gaze to the small crate in the corner marked with danger symbols. A smile spread across his face, the first real smile she'd seen from him. "I feel very good about it." They worked quickly, Jonathan showing her how to rig the charges with longer fuses. Outside, Blackwell was still talking, making threats about bringing the law about her mixed blood, making her testimony worthless in court, about how no one would miss a half-breed woman who couldn't even pay her debts. "Ready?" Jonathan asked, holding a lit match. "Wait." She grabbed his arm. "If we do this, there's no going back. We're declaring war on a man with money and influence. Evelyn, he declared war the moment he sent men to kill me and steal your land. This is just fighting back." She nodded. "Light it." The fuses sparked to life, and Jonathan kicked open the back door of the shack. They threw the dynamite in different directions, one toward the cluster of horses, one into the rocks where gunmen hid, one toward the tree line where Blackwell stood. "Down!" Jonathan yanked her to the floor as gunfire erupted. The explosions came in rapid succession, shaking the shack to its foundations. Horses screamed, men shouted, and through it all Evelyn could hear Blackwell cursing. When the smoke cleared and they dared to look out, half of Blackwell's men were down, the rest scattered. "You bitch!" Blackwell screamed. "You'll hang for this." "Self-defense," Jonathan called back. "You attacked first. We've got witnesses." "What witnesses?" That's when Evelyn saw them riders coming fast from the direction of her ranch. But these weren't more of Blackwell's men. The lead rider was Thomas Running Elk, an elder from the reservation who'd sometimes traded with her father. Behind him rode 6 young Cherokee men, all armed. "These witnesses," Thomas said, pulling up his horse between the shack and Blackwell. "We heard shooting, came to investigate, saw these men attacking Miss Carter on her own land." Blackwell's face went purple. "You think anyone will believe a bunch of Indians?" "They'll believe me." Another voice, and Evelyn was shocked to see Judge Harrison from town riding with the Cherokee party. "Thomas asked me to come when he saw riders heading this way earlier. Thought there might be trouble. Looks like he was right." "Judge Harrison," Blackwell started his tone, switching to oily charm. "Surely you can see. I can see you brought armed men onto Miss Carter's land. I can see evidence of a fight you started. And I can see you'd best leave before I have you arrested for attempted murder." "This isn't over," Blackwell snarled. "That land belongs to the railroad." "No," Judge Harrison said firmly. "I've been doing some checking since Thomas came to me with concerns. There's no new railroad survey. You've been lying, Malcolm and I intend to find out why." Blackwell gathered his remaining men, including the wounded, and rode off. But the look he gave Evelyn promised this was far from finished. Thomas Running Elk dismounted, approaching the shack where Evelyn and Jonathan stood in the doorway. "Your father was a good man," he said to Evelyn. "He helped our people many times quietly, without seeking praise. When I heard his daughter was in trouble, I had to come." "You knew," Evelyn asked. About my mother. Susan Crow Feather was my cousin. You have her eyes. He smiled sadly. Your father asked us to watch over you, but from a distance. You had to find your own path first. And now you've found it. The sacred medicine place has revealed itself to you, as Susan always said it would when the time was right. Judge Harrison cleared his throat. Miss Carter, I'll need statements from you and Mr. Mercer, Jonathan supplied. Mr. Mercer. But that can wait until tomorrow. Thomas might. I suggest you and your men escort Miss Carter and Mr. Mercer back to her ranch, in case Blackwell decides to return. The ride back was surreal. Evelyn, surrounded by Cherokee warriors who spoke to her in English and their own language, calling her cousin, telling her stories of Susan Crow Feather that her father had never known. Jonathan rode beside her, quiet but alert, his presence a steady comfort in the chaos of the day. At the ranch, Thomas insisted on leaving 2 of his men to stand guard for the night. Blackwell is not done, he warned. Men like him never accept defeat easily. When they were finally alone, Evelyn and Jonathan sat by the fire in the main house, both exhausted but too wired to sleep. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything. You don't need to thank me. You'd have handled it yourself if I wasn't here. Maybe, but I'm glad you were here. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, then Evelyn asked, What happens now? Blackwell will come back with more men, probably, and I still owe the bank money. Thomas mentioned your father helped his people. They'll help you in return, and Judge Harrison seems to be on your side now. But for how long Blackwell has money influence? I have sheep and a cave full of plants I don't fully understand. Jonathan was quiet for a moment, then, You also have me, if you want. She looked at him, firelight dancing across his weathered features. You're staying, if you'll have me. I'm tired of drifting, Evelyn. These weeks here working with you, having a purpose, it's the most alive I've felt in 8 years. I can't pay you. I don't want payment. I want a partner, someone to help you run this place, protect what your mother died for, build something worth having. He paused. Unless you prefer to do it alone. She thought about the last weeks, how natural it had felt working beside him, how right it seemed having him there. She'd been alone for so long, she'd forgotten what it was like to have someone to lean on. Partners? She agreed, holding out her hand. He took it, his grip warm and calloused and perfect. Partners. That night she dreamed of the cave again, but this time she wasn't alone. Susan Crow Feather stood beside her, pointing out plants, speaking in rapid Cherokee that Evelyn somehow understood. Her father was there too, and Mary, all of them working together to teach her, to prepare her. She woke to the sound of Jonathan working on the barn, reinforcing the repairs they'd made. Through her window she could see the Cherokee guards Thomas had left, and beyond them the land that was hers by birth and choice and determination. The fight with Blackwell wasn't over, she knew that, but she also knew she wasn't alone anymore. She had Jonathan, she had her Cherokee cousins, she had Judge Harrison's support, and most importantly, she had the truth about who she was. Evelyn dressed quickly and went to help Jonathan with the barn. As she walked across the yard, she saw him look up and smile, and something in her chest that had been frozen since her father's death finally began to thaw. The next few days brought a stream of visitors. First, Judge Harrison returned with a federal marshal he'd summoned from Billings. The marshal, a stern man named Cooper, took detailed statements about the attack. Blackwell's claiming you attacked him, Cooper said, but his tone suggested he didn't believe it. With dynamite we just happened to have ready while defending my own property, Evelyn asked. That's the thing about self-defense, Cooper said with a slight smile. You use whatever's handy, and given that Thomas Running Elk and Judge Harrison both witnessed the aftermath, I'm inclined to believe your version. Then came something unexpected. Other ranchers from the Valley men who'd never given Evelyn more than a cold nod in town. They came with offers of help, extra hands for the spring shearing loans to help with the bank debt. Your father helped me once, said old Pete Morrison, who owned the spread to the south. Gave me medicine for my wife when she was dying, wouldn't take payment. Some of us knew about Susan, about you. We kept quiet because Samuel asked us to, but we haven't forgotten what we owe. But the most surprising visitor came 3 days after the confrontation. Evelyn was in the barn tending to Clementine's wound, which was healing well when she heard horses approach. Jonathan appeared immediately rifle in hand, but relaxed when he saw who it was. An elderly Cherokee woman rode in front, her back straight despite her obvious age. Behind her came Thomas running elk and two younger women carrying bundles. "Grandmother Singing Bird," Thomas said formally, helping the elderly woman dismount. "This is Evelyn Susan's daughter." The old woman approached Evelyn slowly, her dark eyes studying every feature. Then she reached out and touched Evelyn's face gently. "Yes," she said in accented English, "Susan's strength is in you, but also confusion pain. You've been split between two worlds belonging to neither." "I don't know what I belong to anymore," Evelyn admitted. "Then we will teach you. The sacred medicine place has accepted you," Thomas told me. "That means Susan's gift lives in you, whether you were raised to it or not." Over the next week, Grandmother Singing Bird and the younger women stayed at the ranch, teaching Evelyn about the plants in the cave, their properties, their preparation. It wasn't just medicine, it was a whole way of understanding the world, the connections between all living things. Jonathan watched from a respectful distance, continuing his work on the ranch, but always nearby if needed. He was building something in the barn, working late into the night, but wouldn't tell Evelyn what it was. "Patience," he said when she asked. "Some things need to be revealed at the right time." The teaching was intensive, overwhelming at times. Evelyn's head spun with new knowledge, which plants could be combined, which were poison unless prepared correctly. How to read the signs in leaves and roots that indicated potency. But more than that, Grandmother Singing Bird taught her about her mother. Susan was the strongest medicine keeper of her generation, the old woman said one evening as they prepared a fever remedy from the cave plants. She could have been a bridge between our world and the white world, but she died too young. Why did she leave the reservation? For love. Your father saved her brother's life during a skirmish with soldiers. Susan went to thank him to offer medicine for his wounded. They fell in love fast and hard the way young people do, but there was no place for them together. Not then. So they kept it secret. Until you came. Then Susan had to choose raise you on the reservation where you'd be safe but limited, or give you to Samuel and Mary where you'd have opportunities but lose your heritage. She chose opportunity. She chose to give you the chance to choose for yourself when you were ready, and now you are. That night, unable to sleep, Evelyn walked to the cave alone. The Cherokee guards didn't stop her. They'd been told she had the right to come and go as she pleased. Inside, surrounded by the impossible green warmth, she sat by one of the spring pools and tried to reconcile all the pieces of herself. She was Evelyn Carter Samuel and Mary's daughter in every way that mattered for 24 years, but she was also the daughter of Susan Crow Feather, inheritor of ancient knowledge and sacred responsibility. She was a sheep rancher fighting to keep her land, and she was a medicine keeper learning to understand power she'd never known she possessed. It's a lot to carry. She looked up to find Jonathan at the cave entrance, silhouetted against the night sky. "I didn't hear you follow me." "I wasn't following. I was worrying. It's been a hard week for you." He came to sit beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. The warm air of the cave made his presence feel closer, somehow more intimate. "How do you do it?" she asked. "Carry the weight of different lives, different selves. You mean the carpenter and the soldier, the husband and the widower?" "Yes." He was quiet for a long moment, then, "You don't choose between them. You find a way to be all of them, even when they seem to contradict. The soldier in me knows how to fight, how to protect what matters. The carpenter knows how to build to create something lasting. The husband remembers how to love. The widower knows that love is precious because it doesn't last forever. And now I'm trying to be something new, a partner, a protector of something sacred." He looked at her. "A friend, if nothing else." "You're already more than that," she said quietly. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility and complication. Then Evelyn stood, breaking the tension. "I should get back. Grandmother Singing Bird wants to start early tomorrow." They walked back together through the cold night, the warmth of the cave fading, but something else equally warm settling between them. The next morning brought new trouble. A messenger from town arrived with an official-looking document. The bank was calling in her father's loan, giving her 30 days to pay in full or forfeit the property. Blackwell, Jonathan said grimly. He's on the bank's board. 30 days, Evelyn said, staring at the number on the paper. It's impossible. The wool won't be ready to sell for 3 months at least. Thomas Running Elk, who'd returned with Grandmother Singing Bird, looked thoughtful. The plants in the cave. Some of them are valuable, very valuable, to the right buyers. No, Grandmother Singing Bird said sharply. Those are not for selling to the highest bidder. They're sacred medicine. But if used to save the land that protects them, Thomas argued. They debated for hours, Evelyn listening but saying little. Finally, she made a decision. We sell enough to pay the debt, nothing more, and only to buyers who will use them for healing, not profit. Grandmother Singing Bird studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Susan would have chosen the same. You have wisdom to match your gift. But finding buyers who met their criteria proved difficult. Judge Harrison helped using his connections to reach doctors and healers who understood the value of rare medicinal plants. Jonathan rode to Billings, returning with a Chinese herbalist who nearly wept when he saw what grew in the cave. These are worth 10 times your debt, the herbalist said. In San Francisco, they would cause a sensation. We only need enough for the debt, Evelyn insisted. The herbalist agreed to their terms, paying in gold and promising to keep the source secret. But word was already spreading. Men arrived claiming to be doctors, scientists, entrepreneurs. Evelyn turned them all away, but their presence meant Blackwell would soon know exactly what the cave contained. We need to prepare for a siege, Jonathan said one evening, watching strangers camp just outside the property line. He'll come with everything he has. How do we fight money and influence? With law and allies. Over the next days, Jonathan proved his worth as more than a protector. He'd kept connections from his military days, men who'd risen to positions of influence. Telegraph messages flew back and forth, and slowly a different picture emerged. Blackwell wasn't just after the cave for profit. He was deeply in debt to Eastern investors, men who'd been promised a revolutionary medical discovery. He'd staked everything on getting Evelyn's land and the cave it concealed. He's desperate, Judge Harrison said, reading the latest telegram. Which makes him dangerous. The attack came at dawn 5 days before the loan was due. Not Blackwell himself, he was too clever for that, but hired guns from outside the territory, men with no connection to the local community. Evelyn woke to gunfire, Jonathan already at the window with his rifle. How many, she asked, grabbing her Winchester. 15, maybe 20. They're trying to surround us. But they'd prepared for this. The Cherokee guards raised the alarm, and within minutes, responding gunfire came from multiple positions. Jonathan had spent the week fortifying the ranch, creating defensive positions, planning fields of fire. The battle was fierce but brief. The attackers hadn't expected such organized resistance. When the smoke cleared, 3 of the hired guns were dead, 5 wounded, and the rest had fled. This proves Blackwell's behind it, Judge Harrison said, arriving with Marshal Cooper and a posse. No one else has reason to attack you. But proving Blackwell ordered the attack was different from knowing it. The captured gunmen claimed they'd been hired by a mysterious benefactor they'd never met. Then Evelyn had an idea. The cave, she said to Jonathan. What if we make it public? Not the location, but the fact that it exists, that it contains valuable medicinal plants. Make it famous enough that destroying it or stealing it would be impossible. That's brilliant, Judge Harrison said. If the whole territory knows about it, Blackwell can't secretly exploit it. They moved fast. Judge Harrison contacted newspapermen in Billings and even Denver. The story of the Cherokee medicine cave, protected by a half-white, half-Cherokee woman fighting against corrupt business interests, caught fire. Within days, reporters were arriving wanting to interview Evelyn to understand the story. She was uncomfortable with the attention, but Jonathan coached her through it. You're not just telling your story, he said. You're protecting your heritage by making it too visible to destroy. The strategy worked. Public opinion turned sharply against Blackwell. The bank, suddenly under scrutiny, extended her loan deadline. Eastern investors, not wanting to be associated with scandal, pulled their backing from Blackwell's schemes. But the final blow came from an unexpected source. A package arrived from Pennsylvania addressed to Jonathan. Inside was a thick folder of documents and a letter. Jonathan, the letter read, when I heard you were in Montana, I did some checking on this Blackwell fellow you mentioned in your telegram. Turns out he's wanted in 3 states for fraud. Documents enclosed should be enough for any federal marshal. Your friend William. Marshal Cooper arrested Blackwell that very day. The man who'd terrorized Evelyn for months was led away in chains screaming about how they'd all pay, how the land was his by right. "It's over," Judge Harrison said, watching the prison wagon disappear into the distance. But for Evelyn, it felt like a beginning. The weeks following Blackwell's arrest brought a strange quiet to the ranch. Evelyn found herself jumping at shadows, waiting for the next threat that never came. The reporters had gone back to their cities with their stories, the Cherokee guards had returned to the reservation, and even Marshal Cooper had ridden back to Billings. Only Jonathan remained working steadily on mysterious projects in the barn, emerging covered in sawdust with that slight smile that made her heart do uncomfortable things. "You're building enough furniture to fill 3 houses," she said one morning, finding him planing a piece of oak to silk smoothness. "Maybe I am," he replied, not looking up from his work. "Jonathan Mercer, what are you planning?" He set down the plane, turning to face her fully. "I'm planning for a future. For the first time in 8 years, I'm building things meant to last longer than a season." The weight of his words hung between them. Since the crisis had passed, they'd fallen into an easy rhythm of working together, but neither had spoken about what came next. The partnership he'd proposed during the fight with Blackwell had been about survival. Now that the danger was past, everything felt uncertain again. "The future," she repeated softly. "And what does that look like to you?" Before he could answer, they heard horses approaching. Evelyn tensed her hand, going automatically to where her rifle should be, but Jonathan touched her arm gently. "It's Thomas," he said. I recognize his horse's gait." "Indeed, Thomas." Running Elk rode into the yard, but his expression was grave. Behind him came Grandmother Singing Bird on her steady mare, and with them rode a white man Evelyn didn't recognize, older, well-dressed, with the bearing of someone used to authority. "Evelyn," Thomas said without preamble, "this is James Patterson from the Bureau of Indian Affairs." Her stomach dropped. The Bureau was rarely good news for anyone with Indian blood. Patterson dismounted his eyes, taking in everything: the ranch, the barn. Jonathan's protective stance beside her. "Miss Carter, or should I say Miss Crowfeather, I'm here about the cave." "The cave is on my land," Evelyn said firmly. "My father owned this property legally, and it passed to me." "That's actually what I'm here to discuss," Patterson said, pulling out a leather portfolio. "You see, there's some question about the exact boundaries of your property. According to our surveys, the cave may actually be on reservation land." "That's impossible," Jonathan interjected. "Samuel Carter had this land surveyed 3 times. I've seen the documents." Patterson smiled thinly. "Surveys can be interpreted different ways, especially when valuable resources are involved." "What do you want?" Evelyn asked bluntly. "The Bureau is interested in the medicinal properties of the plants in that cave. We could help a lot of people, Indian and white alike. We're prepared to make you a generous offer for access rights." "And if I refuse?" "Then we'll have to pursue the boundary question more aggressively. Courts tend to side with federal interests in these matters." Grandmother Singing Bird spoke for the first time in rapid Cherokee. Thomas translated, "She says the cave belongs to neither white law nor reservation law. It's sacred ground, older than both." Patterson's expression hardened. "Superstition has no standing in federal court, I'm afraid." "But treaties do," a new voice said. Everyone turned to see Judge Harrison riding up, accompanied by someone Evelyn recognized from newspaper sketches. Frederick Hawthorne, one of the most prominent lawyers in the territory. "Mr. Patterson," Hawthorne said, pleasantly dismounting with surprising agility for his age, "I've been retained to represent Miss Carter's interests. I believe you'll find the Treaty of 1851 specifically exempts sacred medicine sites from federal jurisdiction." Patterson's face flushed. "That treaty was about hunting grounds." "The language is quite broad, actually. Places of spiritual and medicinal significance to the Cherokee people shall remain inviolate. I have 3 Supreme Court precedents that support this interpretation." The 2 men stared at each other, a battle of wills that had nothing to do with physical force. Finally, Patterson stepped back. "This isn't over," he said. "The Bureau has long memory and longer reach." As does the law, Hawthorne replied mildly. After Patterson left, Evelyn looked at the lawyer in amazement. Why are you helping me? I can't afford— Thomas asked me to come, Hawthorne said. But more than that, I've been following your story. The daughter of Susan Crowfeather, protecting sacred ground from exploitation. That's a case that could set precedent for indigenous rights throughout the territory. I'd represent you for free, just for the chance to argue it. But Grandmother Singing Bird shook her head. No courts. The cave doesn't need white man's law to protect it. It needs a guardian who understands both worlds. She looked directly at Evelyn. The ceremony must be done. You must be recognized formally as the medicine keeper, or others will keep coming. I don't know enough yet, Evelyn protested. I've only been learning for weeks. Susan knew from childhood and still died young. Knowledge isn't just time, it's calling. The cave has already chosen you. Now the people must. The ceremony was set for the next full moon 3 days away. Word spread through the reservation and beyond. Cherokee came from as far as the Canadian border, and with them came unexpected allies, white doctors who'd benefited from Cherokee medicine ranchers who'd been helped by Samuel Carter, even some of the newspaper men who'd covered the story. Jonathan worked even harder in the barn, barely stopping to eat. When Evelyn tried to see what he was building, he gently but firmly escorted her out. After the ceremony, Wos, he promised. Everything after the ceremony. The night before, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She walked out to her parents' graves, all her parents now, she supposed. The moon was almost full, casting silver light across the snow. I don't know if I can do this, she said to the silent stones. Be both things at once, white and Cherokee, rancher and medicine keeper. I feel like I'm being pulled apart. Your mother felt the same. Grandmother Singing Bird appeared beside her, moving silently despite her age. Susan stood between worlds her whole life. It's not comfortable, but it's necessary. Someone must be the bridge. Why me? Why not you? You have your mother's gift and your father's stubbornness. You have the legal right to the land and the blood right to the knowledge. You've already fought for both. The ceremony just makes official what already is. And after what happens after you choose your path, the ceremony opens doors, it doesn't force you through them. The old woman studied her carefully. That man Jonathan. He looks at you like Samuel looked at Susan. Evelyn felt heat rise in her cheeks. It's not we're partners, business partners. I may be old, but I'm not blind. He's building something in that barn, working like a man with a deadline, like a man with something to prove. He lost his wife. He's not looking for— Child, the heart doesn't stop seeking connection just because it's been broken. Sometimes it seeks even harder, knowing how precious love is. She patted Evelyn's arm. Your mother would like him. He has steady hands and kind eyes. The day of the ceremony dawned clear and cold. Evelyn was awakened before dawn by the younger Cherokee women who helped her dress in traditional clothing they'd made, soft doeskin decorated with beadwork that told Susan's story and her own. They braided her hair with feathers and silver ornaments that had belonged to her mother. Looking in the mirror, Evelyn barely recognized herself. The woman staring back looked like the daguerreotype of Susan, but also like herself. Both, and neither, something entirely new. The ceremony itself was held at the cave, with participants forming a large circle around the entrance. Thomas Running Elk led the rituals, speaking in Cherokee, with Hawthorne translating for the white observers. There were songs that seemed to rise from the earth itself, drumming that matched the rhythm of heartbeats, and smoke from sacred herbs that made the air shimmer. Evelyn was led into the cave, alone, instructed to sit by the largest spring pool and wait. In the darkness, lit only by phosphorescent plants she hadn't noticed before, she could hear the ceremony continuing outside, but it seemed very far away. Then she heard it, or felt it. She couldn't be sure which. A presence ancient and patient that seemed to emanate from the cave itself. Not frightening, but overwhelming in its vastness. It was like the cave was alive, aware, and it was examining her, testing her worthiness. Images flooded her mind, Susan as a young girl learning from her grandmother. Samuel, desperate and dying, being saved by Cherokee medicine. The plants growing impossibly in winter warmth, each one a living library of healing knowledge. And further back, so far back she couldn't comprehend the timescale, others who had guarded this place, protected it, died for it. She understood then that she wasn't just accepting responsibility for a cave full of valuable plants. She was becoming part of something ancient, a chain of guardians stretching back to the beginning of memory. "I accept," she said aloud, though no question had been asked in words. The presence seemed to approve, withdrawing slowly like tide going out. When she emerged from the cave, hours had passed, though it felt like minutes. The sun was setting, painting the snow pink and gold. The ceremony participants were still there waiting. Thomas stepped forward with a smile. "The cave has spoken. You are recognized as medicine keeper guardian of sacred ground. You are Susan Crow Feather's daughter in truth and law." The Cherokee erupted in celebration, but Evelyn's eyes sought Jonathan in the crowd. He was standing at the back, his expression unreadable. When their eyes met, he nodded once and slipped away into the growing darkness. She wanted to follow, but tradition demanded she stay for the feast, accept congratulations, listen to stories of her mother from those who'd known her. It was midnight before she could escape exhaustion weighing down her limbs. The ranch was quiet, most of the celebration participants camping in the fields or staying in the barn. But there was light coming from behind the barn, from the new structure Jonathan had been building. She approached slowly, her ceremonial dress rustling in the cold night air. The door was open, warm light spilling out. Inside, she stopped in amazement. It was a house, small but perfect, with clever built-in furniture that maximized every inch of space. Everything was beautifully crafted, smooth wooden surfaces, joints so precise they seemed to grow together, details that showed a master's touch. It was a carpenter's love song in wood and stone. Jonathan stood in the center, adding a last piece to a rocking chair by the fireplace. "It's beautiful," she breathed. He turned his eyes, taking in her ceremonial appearance. "So are you." "The ceremony, it went well, Yes, but Jonathan, what is this?" "It's hope," he said simply. "It's me being presumptuous, probably. But I wanted you to have something that was yours, completely yours. Not your father's house with all its memories, but something new. Something that could be a beginning. A beginning for who?" He set down his tools, crossing to stand before her. For you and whoever you choose to share it with, even if that's no one, even if you want to be alone." "I don't," she said quickly, then caught herself. I don't want to be alone anymore." "Neither do I." He reached out, hesitating just before touching her face. "Evelyn, I came here following a dying man's request, but somewhere between fighting wolves and fighting Blackwell, between watching you discover your heritage and seeing you stand up to everyone who tried to take it away, I fell in love with you. I don't expect—" She kissed him. It wasn't elegant, she had no experience with such things, but it was honest and desperate, and full of all the loneliness they both carried, finally finding its opposite. When they separated, both breathing hard, Jonathan rested his forehead against hers. "Is this wise?" he asked. "You're the medicine keeper now. You have responsibilities, traditions, and I'm just a carpenter who used to be a soldier with more ghosts than prospects. You're the man who saved my life, who stood beside me when I had nothing to offer but trouble. You're the one who helped me find out who I really am without trying to change me into something else." She pulled back to look at him. "And if you think I went through all this just to end up alone in a beautiful house, you're not as smart as I thought." He laughed, then the first full, genuine laugh she'd heard from him. "Marry me. I know it's too soon. I know everything's complicated, but marry me anyway. When? Tomorrow, tonight, 10 years from now. Whenever you're ready, but let me court you proper in the meantime. Court me while we're living together on the ranch. Well, you'll be in the main house, I'll be in this one. Very proper. People will barely gossip." Now she laughed. "People will gossip no matter what we do. A half-breed medicine keeper and a mysterious carpenter with a military past will be the talk of 3 territories. Let them talk." He grew serious again. "Evelyn, I know what I'm asking. Your life just got complicated in ways we can't even predict yet. The Bureau won't give up. There'll be more Blackwells, more people trying to exploit what you're protecting. And I'm asking you to let me share that burden. And if I said yes, what then? Then we face it together, build something together. Not just houses or ranches, but a place where both worlds can meet. Where Cherokee medicine and white medicine can work together. Where your children, our children, if we're blessed, can grow up knowing both sides of their heritage without shame. Children? She repeated softly, something warm blooming in her chest at the thought. Only if you want. I lost Catherine and I lost our child with her, but that doesn't mean I stopped hoping that someday. She kissed him again, gentler this time. Yes. Yes to children. Yes to all of it. Marriage, partnership, facing whatever comes together. Yes. They were married a week later in a ceremony that brought together the most unlikely gathering Montana had ever seen. Judge Harrison officiated the legal ceremony while Thomas Running Elk blessed them in Cherokee tradition. Grandmother Singing Bird sang wedding songs that hadn't been heard in a generation. The Chinese herbalist from Billings brought silk ribbons for luck. Even Marshal Cooper attended, claiming he wanted to make sure no one started trouble. The small house Jonathan had built became their home, though they expanded it over the months that followed. The main house was converted into a clinic where Evelyn could prepare and dispense medicines, where doctors could come to learn about the cave plants without exploiting them. But trouble did come, as they'd known it would. The Bureau sent more representatives, each with new arguments for why the cave should be under government control. Railroad magnates arrived with offers of astounding sums for the land. Scientists from universities back east wanted to study the unique ecosystem. Each time, Evelyn and Jonathan stood firm. They allowed limited access researchers who would respect the sacred nature of the site, doctors who needed specific medicines for desperate cases, Cherokee healers who came to learn what Susan hadn't had time to teach. But they never sold, never gave up control, never let anyone take more than the cave could sustainably give. There were other battles, too. Men who couldn't accept a mixed-blood woman owning valuable land or a white man married to someone with Indian blood. There were threats, a few attacks, even an attempt to burn down the barn. But there were more allies than enemies. The story of the Medicine Cave and its guardians spread, becoming something of a legend. Patients who'd been healed by Evelyn's medicines became advocates. The Cherokee Nation officially recognized her as a bridge between worlds, a position that came with its own protections. And through it all, Jonathan built. Not just structures, though he did build those, including a school where Cherokee and white children could learn together, but community. He had a gift for bringing people together, for finding common ground where others saw only division. You're good at this, Evelyn told him one evening, watching him mediate a dispute between Cherokee traditionalists and white settlers over water rights. I learned from watching you, he replied. You stand in both worlds without letting either one claim you completely. It's a kind of strength I didn't know existed. 2 years after their marriage, their first child was born, a daughter they named Susan, Mary, honoring both her grandmothers. She had Evelyn's dark hair and Jonathan's gray eyes, and from the moment she could walk, she was drawn to the cave like her mother before her. She has the gift, Grandmother Singing Bird said, watching the toddler correctly identify medicinal plants without being taught. Stronger even than you. Then she'll need to be stronger than me, too, Evelyn replied, thinking of all the challenges her daughter would face. She will be. She has both of you to teach her. The autumn Susan Mary turned 3, an unexpected visitor arrived. A woman elderly but straight-backed, dressed in clothes that spoke of Eastern wealth. Jonathan went very still when he saw her. Mrs. Ashford, he said carefully. Catherine's mother. Evelyn's heart clenched. She'd known this day might come when Jonathan's past arrived at their door. She gathered Susan Mary protectively, but the child wiggled free, running to the stranger with the fearlessness of childhood. Pretty lady, she announced. You sad? Mrs. Ashford looked down at the child, and her stern expression cracked. Yes, little one. I've been sad for a long time. Jonathan, she said, her voice formal but shaking slightly. I heard you'd remarried. I had to see for myself. I wrote to you, he said quietly. When it happened, you never replied. I was angry. You survived when she didn't. It seemed unfair. She looked at Evelyn, then taking in everything, her mixed heritage, her simple dress, the medicine bag at her belt. You're not what I expected. Few people are, Evelyn replied evenly. They stood in awkward silence until Susan Mary tugged on Mrs. Ashford's skirt. Come see cave magic plants make people better. Susan Mary, no. Evelyn started, but Mrs. Ashford surprised her. I'd like that if it's permitted. Catherine wrote about Montana's natural beauty in her letters before she got sick. They spent the day together, unlikely companions brought together by a child's innocent insistence. Mrs. Ashford revealed she'd been ill herself, a wasting disease doctors in Philadelphia couldn't cure. She'd come west partly to see Jonathan, partly because she'd heard rumors of a medicine woman with Cherokee knowledge who could heal what others couldn't. "I didn't realize the medicine woman was your wife," she said to Jonathan. Evelyn prepared a treatment from the cave plants, explaining each ingredient as she worked. Mrs. Ashford watched with intelligent eyes, asking sharp questions that revealed a scientific mind. "Catherine would have loved this," she said softly. "She was always interested in botany and natural remedies. She would have understood what you're doing here." "Your daughter sounds like she was remarkable," Evelyn said. "She was, and she loved Jonathan completely." Mrs. Ashford looked at Jonathan, who was helping Susan Mary feed the chickens. "I hated him for moving on, for finding happiness again. But seeing this place, seeing that child who has his eyes and your spirit, I understand now. Catherine wouldn't have wanted him to stop living." She stayed for a week, and by the time she left, the medicine had begun to work. She would return twice a year for the next decade, becoming an unexpected advocate for their work, using her influence in Eastern circles to protect them from government interference. "Family comes in unexpected forms," she said on one visit, teaching Susan Mary to read from the same primer she'd used with Catherine. As years passed, the ranch became something unique in the territory, a place where Cherokee and white traditional and modern sacred and scientific coexisted. They faced challenges, drought years that threatened the sheep, political changes that brought new threats to indigenous rights, the constant struggle to protect the cave from exploitation. But they also had victories. Susan Mary grew strong and wise, learning medicine from her mother and carpentry from her father. 2 more children followed Samuel Thomas, named for both grandfathers, and Catherine Singing Bird, whose name honored all the women who'd shaped their family. Jonathan's hair went completely gray and lines carved themselves around Evelyn's eyes, but the partnership they'd forged in crisis only grew stronger with time. They'd built something worth having, something that would outlast them. One evening, as they sat on the porch of the house Jonathan had built, now expanded to accommodate their growing family, Evelyn reflected on the journey that had brought them here. "Do you remember that first night?" she asked. "You bleeding in my barn, both of us sure we'd be dead by morning. I remember thinking you were either the bravest or most foolish woman I'd ever met, dragging a stranger inside during a blizzard. And I thought you were either a hero or trouble I couldn't afford. Which was I? Both, definitely both." He laughed, pulling her closer. "No regrets." She thought about it. The isolation before he came, the battles they'd fought, the complicated path of living between 2 worlds, the children now sleeping safely in their beds, the cave still protected and powerful, the community they'd built around them. "None," she said firmly. "Not one." In the distance, wolves howled, not a threat now, but a reminder of wildness that still existed alongside civilization. The sound used to terrify her, but now it seemed right necessary. The wolves belonged here just as she did, just as the cave did, just as the unlikely family they'd created did. "Storm coming," Jonathan observed, reading the wind like he always could. "Let it come," Evelyn replied. "We've weathered worse." And they had. Together they'd faced down predators, both animal and human, prejudice and greed, loss and loneliness. They'd built not just a ranch or a family, but a bridge between worlds that had seemed impossibly separated. The first drops of rain began to fall, but neither moved to go inside. There was something peaceful about sitting together as the storm approached, knowing they'd prepared for it, knowing they'd survive it, knowing that whatever came next, they'd face it, as they'd faced everything else together, with courage, with love, and with the strength that came from standing firmly in 2 worlds while belonging completely to each other. The storm that night brought more than rain. It brought a stranger to their door, a young woman barely older than 16 Cherokee by her features, but dressed in the tattered remains of an Eastern boarding school uniform. She collapsed on their porch just as lightning split the sky, burning with fever and muttering in a mixture of English and Cherokee that made little sense. "Please," she gasped as Jonathan carried her inside. They can't find me. They'll take me back. Evelyn recognized the signs immediately, not just fever, but the particular exhaustion that came from running too hard for too long. While Jonathan stoked the fire, she prepared medicines from her stores, noting the girl's cracked lips, the way her bones showed too sharp beneath her skin. "What's your name?" Evelyn asked gently, helping the girl sip a willow bark tea. "Rachel. Rachel Crowdog. But they called me Rebecca at the school, said my real name was Savage." Susan Mary, now 5 and always curious, peered around the corner despite being told to stay in bed. "Mama, why is she so sad?" "Back to bed, little one," Jonathan said firmly, but Rachel's eyes had locked onto the child. "You let her keep her hair," she whispered, reaching up to touch her own shorn scalp where hair was just beginning to grow back. "They cut mine the first day. Said it harbored lice and sin." Evelyn's jaw tightened. She'd heard of the boarding schools where Indian children were taken to kill the Indian, save the man, as their proponents said, but seeing the reality in this broken girl made her stomach turn. "You're safe here," she promised. "No one will take you back." But 3 days later, as Rachel's fever broke and she began to tell her story, they learned it wouldn't be that simple. She'd been taken from the reservation at 8, sent to the Carlisle Industrial School in Pennsylvania. 8 years of being beaten for speaking Cherokee, of watching friends die from tuberculosis, and despair of forgetting who she was until she almost believed she was the Rebecca they insisted she become. "I ran when they said I was ready to be placed in service," she explained, her voice hollow. "They wanted to send me to work for a white family, said it would complete my civilization. But I heard other girls talk about what really happened in those placements." Jonathan's hands clenched. He'd seen enough of the world to understand what she wasn't saying directly. "How did you make it this far?" Evelyn asked. "Walking mostly, hiding in train cars when I could. It took me 4 months. I remembered my grandmother talking about the medicine keeper who was half white, half Cherokee. She said you protected our traditions. I thought maybe you could protect me too." Before Evelyn could respond, they heard horses approaching. Many horses. Jonathan was at the window immediately, his rifle in hand. "Federal agents," he said grimly. 6 of them. The lead agent, a man named Harrison, no relation to the judge, presented his credentials with bureaucratic efficiency. "We're looking for a runaway student from Carlisle, Rebecca Crowdog. She's considered ward of the government until she's 21. "Haven't seen her," Jonathan said flatly. Harrison's eyes narrowed. "Mind if we search your property? The girl is sick, possibly contagious. It's for public safety." "You need a warrant for that," Evelyn said, stepping beside her husband. "Actually, we don't. The Indian Appropriation Act gives us broad authority when pursuing truant Indian students." He produced a document. "She was seen in Billings 2 days ago, heading this direction. Rachel was hidden in the cave. They'd moved her there when they spotted the agents approaching. But if they searched thoroughly—" "I'll make you a deal," Evelyn said suddenly. "You can search the house and barn, but not the cave. That's sacred Cherokee ground, protected by treaty." Harrison laughed. "Treaties? How quaint. Very well, we'll start with the house." They searched brutally efficiently, tossing aside furniture Jonathan had built with such care, rifling through Evelyn's medical supplies, even checking the children's rooms, despite Susan Mary's tears. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. "The barn," Harrison ordered. But as they headed outside, Thomas Running Elk arrived with 20 Cherokee warriors. They said nothing, simply arranged themselves between the agents and the barn. "This is federal business," Harrison sputtered, "and this is tribal land adjacent property under protection." Thomas replied calmly, "The medicine keeper's buildings are considered extension of sacred ground. You've searched the house. Be satisfied." It was a bluff. The barn had no such protection, but Harrison didn't know that. After a tense standoff, he retreated. "We'll be watching," he warned. "The girl has to surface eventually." After they left, Rachel emerged from the cave, shaking. "I should go. I'm putting you all in danger." "You're staying," Evelyn said firmly. "We don't abandon people who need help." But keeping Rachel safe while federal agents watched the ranch required creativity. They officially hired her as a teacher for the children, creating paperwork that showed Rebecca Smith, a white woman from Kansas. Grandmother Singing Bird, who'd returned for one of her regular visits, taught Rachel how to lighten her skin with certain clays when she needed to go to town. how to change her walk and manner to seem more Eastern educated, which, ironically, she was. "I'm becoming someone else again," Rachel said bitterly one day, watching Susan Mary practice her letters. "No," Evelyn corrected. "You're learning to be both like all of us here. Cherokee when you can be white, when you must be, but always yourself underneath." The situation grew more complex when Samuel Thomas, now 3, developed a gift that exceeded even his mother's. He could sense illness in people before symptoms appeared, knew which plants to combine without being taught. But unlike Evelyn's subtle abilities, his were obvious, almost impossible to hide. "The boy's unnatural," muttered a new settler named Garrett, who'd bought land adjacent to theirs. "Yesterday he told my wife she had a growth in her belly, and she ain't even showing yet." "Children imagine things," Jonathan said mildly, but he and Evelyn exchanged worried looks. If word spread about Samuel Thomas's abilities, it would bring the wrong kind of attention. Their fears were justified when a man calling himself Professor Aldrich arrived from Harvard University. He claimed to be studying primitive medicine practices, but his real interest became clear quickly. "The boy is remarkable," he said, having observed Samuel Thomas identify medicinal plants blindfolded by touch alone. "He could revolutionize our understanding of inherited knowledge. I'd like to take him back to Cambridge for proper study." "Over my dead body," Evelyn said flatly. "Mrs. Mercer, surely you understand the scientific value." "I understand you want to turn my son into an experiment." Jonathan stepped forward, his presence suddenly menacing despite his calm tone. "That's not happening." Aldrich persisted for weeks, offering money, making veiled threats about child welfare, even trying to bribe Rachel to help him. She reported every attempt to Evelyn and Jonathan, her loyalty absolute after they'd protected her. The situation came to a head when Aldrich hired men to try to take Samuel Thomas while the family was at the Autumn Harvest Festival in town. But they hadn't counted on Catherine's singing bird, only 2 but fierce as her namesake. She bit one man's hand so hard he needed stitches and screamed loud enough to bring half the town running. Marshal Cooper arrested the men, and Aldrich slunk away, but not before promising this wasn't over. "We need better protection," Jonathan said that night. "Legal protection." The solution came from an unexpected source, Mrs. Ashford, who'd arrived for her semi-annual treatment. When she heard about Aldrich, her expression went cold. "I know his type. They dress their greed in scientific rhetoric, but they're no better than Blackwell." She thought for a moment. "I have connections at Harvard. Real scientists, not charlatans. Let me make some inquiries." Within a month, she'd arranged for a team of legitimate researchers to visit men and women who understood the value of indigenous knowledge and the importance of protecting it. They documented the cave, the plants, the traditional uses, publishing papers that gave scientific credibility to what the Cherokee had always known. More importantly, they established a research partnership that gave the ranch legal protection. Any research had to be approved by Evelyn and the Cherokee Council, and all findings would be shared with both communities. "You've turned our weakness into strength," Thomas told Evelyn admiringly. "By making the knowledge public but controlled, you've made it impossible to steal." But other challenges arose. The winter of 1888 was the worst anyone could remember. Snow fell for weeks without stopping, temperatures dropping so low that trees exploded from frozen sap. The sheep huddled in the barn, but feed was running low. "We need supplies," Jonathan said, but the roads were impassable. That's when Rachel proved her worth beyond teaching. She'd learned survival skills at Carlisle, not the ones they'd meant to teach, but the ones students shared to stay alive. She showed them how to make snowshoes that could bear weight across deep drifts, how to navigate in whiteout conditions using rope guides. Jonathan and Thomas made the journey to town together, returning with supplies just before another storm hit. But they also brought news several ranches had lost entire herds. The Garrett family, despite their prejudice, had run out of food. "Let them starve," Rachel said harshly. "They wouldn't help us." "That's not who we are," Evelyn replied, already packing a bundle of preserved food and medicine. "Susan, you saw Mrs. Garrett was pregnant. Their other children don't deserve to suffer for their father's ignorance." They made the dangerous journey to the Garrett ranch, finding the family near starvation, the children sick with fever. Evelyn worked through the night, using her medicines and knowledge to save them. Samuel Thomas, despite being told to stay back, instinctively knew which child needed which treatment. Garrett watched his son's fever break tears on his weathered face. "I was wrong about you, about all of it. People fear what they don't understand," Evelyn said simply. "Understanding takes time." From that day forward, the Garretts became unexpected allies, defending the Mercers against newcomers who brought prejudice with them. Spring brought its own challenges. The snowmelt caused massive flooding, threatening to wash out the only bridge to town. Jonathan worked day and night with other ranchers to shore it up, his engineering knowledge proving invaluable. During the flood fight, a timber support gave way. Jonathan pushed a younger man clear but was caught by the falling beam. His legs snapped with an audible crack that made strong men wince. They carried him home where Evelyn set the bone with practiced efficiency. But she could see the damage was severe. He might never walk without a limp. "I'm sorry," he said through gritted teeth as she worked. "You don't need a crippled husband on top of everything else." "Stop that," she said sharply. "You saved that man's life, and you're going to heal because I'm very good at what I do and because our children need their father whole." The healing took months. Jonathan struggled with forced inactivity, used to being the one who built, who protected. Rachel and the children rallied around him. Susan Mary reading to him for hours. Samuel Thomas bringing him small projects he could work on, while seated Catherine. Singing Bird simply curling up against him like a cat. "You've built something good here," Rachel told him one day. "Not just buildings, family, community, purpose." "We've built it," he corrected. "All of us." By summer, Jonathan was walking again, though, with the limp Evelyn had feared. He adapted as he adapted to everything, finding new ways to work that accommodated his changed body. He began teaching Samuel Thomas carpentry. Delighted to find the boy had inherited his grandfather Samuel's steady hands, along with his mother's healing gift. That autumn brought a different kind of visitor, a delegation from the Cherokee Nation, formal and serious. They'd come to make Evelyn an offer. "We want to establish a teaching hospital," the lead delegate explained. "A place where Cherokee medicine and white medicine can work together, where our young people can learn both traditions. We want you to run it." It was an honor, but also an impossible request. "I can't leave the cave. It needs protecting." "We're not asking you to leave. We want to build it here on the border between your land and the reservation. The cave would be its heart, protected by both law and tradition." Jonathan and Evelyn discussed it late into the night. It was dangerous, bringing more attention to the cave, more people who might exploit it. But it was also an opportunity to secure its protection permanently, to spread the knowledge Susan Crowfeather had died protecting. "Your mother wanted to be a bridge," Jonathan said finally. "This would be the ultimate bridge." They agreed, but with conditions. The hospital would be small, focused on teaching rather than mass treatment. Students would be selected carefully, would take oaths to protect the sacred nature of the site, and Evelyn would have final say over everything. Construction began the next spring, with Jonathan designing the buildings despite his injury. He created structures that seemed to grow from the landscape using local materials and Cherokee construction techniques combined with modern engineering. The first class had 12 students, 6 Cherokee, 6 white, all chosen for their dedication to healing rather than profit. Rachel became one of the teachers, her experience in both worlds, making her uniquely qualified to help students navigate the cultural differences. But not everyone was happy about the hospital. A new group had formed in town, calling themselves the Protective Association, dedicated to maintaining proper boundaries between races. Their leader was a man named Wilson, who'd arrived from Mississippi with ideas about racial purity that found fertile ground among some settlers. "It's an abomination," Wilson declared at a town meeting. "White and Indian learning together, intermarrying, producing mongrel children. It's against God's law." "Funny," Judge Harrison said mildly. "I don't recall God consulting you when he made his laws." The Protective Association began with words, pamphlets, speeches, graffiti on the hospital walls. But words escalated to actions. Windows were broken. Supplies were vandalized. One night, someone poisoned the well that served the hospital. Samuel Thomas, now 8, was the one who sensed it. "The water's wrong," he announced at breakfast, preventing what could have been a catastrophe. Jonathan had had enough. He gathered the men who'd helped build the hospital, Cherokee and white alike, and they stood guard in shifts. When Wilson's men came one night with torches planning to burn the hospital down, They found themselves facing armed defenders. "You're protecting race mixing," Wilson spat. "I'm protecting healers," Jonathan replied, his rifle steady despite his limp. "People who save lives while you try to destroy them. Now get off our land." The standoff might have turned violent, but Marshal Cooper arrived with federal marshals. The hospital, it turned out, had federal protection as part of a new treaty with the Cherokee Nation. "You're all under arrest," Cooper announced to Wilson's men. "Conspiracy to destroy federal property." Wilson himself escaped, but his movement collapsed without leadership. Many of his followers, faced with the reality of federal prosecution, suddenly discovered they hadn't been that committed after all. The hospital's first graduation ceremony took place 3 years after it opened. 12 healers trained in both traditions went out into the world. Some stayed on the reservation, some went to white towns, all carried the knowledge that healing transcended the boundaries humans tried to impose. Susan Mary, now 13, gave a speech at the ceremony that brought tears to many eyes. "My mother teaches us that medicine isn't about Cherokee or white traditional or modern. It's about recognizing the sacred in all life and working to preserve it. That's what these graduates will do, preserve life, no matter whose life it is." But even as they celebrated, new challenges loomed. The government was pushing the Dawes Act, trying to break up reservation land into individual allotments. The plan would destroy traditional Cherokee governance and make their lands easier to steal. "They're trying to finish what the boarding schools started," Rachel said bitterly. "Destroy us by making us like them." Thomas Running Elk, now gray-haired but still strong, organized resistance. "We need allies in Washington, people who understand what we're trying to preserve here." Mrs. Ashford Frailer, now but still sharp, had connections. "There are congressmen who owe me favors," she said, "men whose lives were saved by medicines from this cave. Perhaps it's time to call in those debts." The fight took them all the way to Washington, where Evelyn testified before Congress about the importance of preserving Cherokee medical knowledge. She brought samples of medicines developed at the hospital statistics, showing improved health outcomes in areas where traditional and modern medicine work together. "You're asking us to protect paganism," one congressman said dismissively. "I'm asking you to protect knowledge that could save your grandchildren's lives," Evelyn replied. "Unless you think God only reveals truth to white Christians." The exemption they won was narrow. The hospital and its associated lands would be held in trust, neither fully reservation nor fully private, but protected from the Dawes Act's provisions. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. The victory celebration was subdued. They'd won this battle, but everyone knew more would come. The world was changing rapidly. Railroads bringing more settlers, telegraph lines connecting previously isolated communities, the old ways of life disappearing like snow in spring. "Sometimes I wonder if we're fighting the tide," Evelyn confessed to Jonathan one evening, watching their children play Susan Mary teaching Catherine Singing Bird Cherokee songs, while Samuel Thomas carved wood with his father's knife. "Maybe," Jonathan agreed. "But tides preserve as well as destroy. Look at what you've built, a place where both traditions strengthen each other instead of canceling out. That's not fighting the tide, that's channeling it." That winter, grandmother Singing Bird came for what everyone knew would be her last visit. At 93, she moved slowly, but her mind remained sharp as obsidian. "I need to pass on the old songs," she told Evelyn, "the ones that were old when my grandmother was young. Susan knew some, but not all. They must not die with me." For 3 weeks, she taught not just Evelyn, but all 3 children, even little Catherine, who was only 7. The songs were more than music, they were history. Medicine, prayer, and power combined. Samuel Thomas surprised everyone by having perfect pitch, able to reproduce the complex tones after hearing them once. "He has the voice gift too," grandmother Singing Bird said with satisfaction. "Medicine and music together as they should be." She died peacefully in her sleep on the winter solstice, but not before making one last revelation. "The cave has sisters," she whispered to Evelyn. "Other sacred places hidden waiting. Your children will find them. It's their destiny to reunite the medicine circles that were broken by the removal. The knowledge must be whole again." After her funeral, attended by hundreds, Cherokee and white alike, Evelyn found herself standing in the cave with her children. They'd come seeking comfort in the sacred space, but something was different. The plants seemed brighter. The water sang with new notes, and in the deepest chamber, previously hidden passages had opened. Mama, look, Catherine Singing Bird said, pointing to symbols glowing faintly on the cave walls, symbols that matched one's grandmother Singing Bird had drawn in her final days. It's a map, Susan Mary breathed, to the sister caves. Samuel Thomas touched one of the symbols and jerked back. I can see them, places like this all across the country, but they're sleeping, waiting. Evelyn understood then that their work was far from over. Protecting one cave building, one hospital, bridging two cultures in one valley, that was just the beginning. Her children would carry the work forward, spreading further, protecting more healing, deeper divisions than she and Jonathan had ever faced. It's too much, she said aloud. How can we possibly— The same way we've done everything else, Jonathan said, having followed them into the cave. Together, one step at a time with faith that we're doing what needs to be done. Rachel appeared at the entrance. Her own children she'd married a mixed-blood teacher at the hospital peering around her. The evening class is ready for your lecture, Evelyn. Evelyn looked around at her family, her students, her community. The weight of Grandmother Singing Bird's revelation was heavy, but so had been every other challenge they'd faced. They'd fought wolves and weather prejudice and greed, government and ignorance. They'd built bridges between worlds that seemed unbridgeable. Tell them I'll be right there, she said. We have work to do. As they walked back to the hospital together, the aurora borealis suddenly blazed across the sky, unusual this far south, the elders would say later. The lights danced in patterns that looked almost like Cherokee symbols, like blessings written in fire across the winter dark. A sign, Thomas running elk would tell people later, the ancestors approving the path forward. But for Evelyn and Jonathan walking hand in hand despite his limp and her exhaustion, their children ranging ahead full of energy and purpose. It was simpler than that. It was a reminder that beauty could appear unexpectedly, that the impossible could become possible, that sometimes the bridge between worlds could be built from nothing more than determination, love, and the courage to keep walking forward into the unknown. The hospital lights glowed warm against the snow as they approached students visible through the windows waiting to learn. Behind them, the cave held its ancient secrets while offering its healing freely to those who approached with respect. And somewhere in the distance, other caves waited. Other bridges remained to be built. Other wounds needed healing. The work of teaching that evening was interrupted by the arrival of a telegram that would change everything. Marshal Cooper himself delivered it, his face grave as he handed it to Jonathan. It's from Washington, he said quietly, from the Secretary of the Interior. Jonathan read it aloud, his voice growing harder with each word. Federal inspection of Cherokee medical facility scheduled. Commission arriving in 2 weeks to determine if operation should be transferred to Bureau of Indian Affairs control. The room erupted in protests from the students, but Evelyn raised her hand for silence. She'd been expecting something like this. The hospital's success had drawn too much attention, helped too many influential people. Someone in Washington had realized how valuable their knowledge was and wanted to control it. They can't just take it, Rachel protested. We have treaties, agreements. They've broken every treaty they've ever made with us, Thomas Running Elk said bitterly. Why would this be different? But Susan Mary Wise, beyond her 16 years, spoke up from where she'd been studying. Then we make it impossible for them to take. We need witnesses, documentation, publicity. Make it so taking the hospital would cause more problems than it solves. Evelyn looked at her daughter with pride. You're thinking like your father, Jonathan. He was already making lists. We need allies. Mrs. Ashford still has connections. The doctors we've trained, the patients we've healed. And, he paused, thinking, the newspapers. If we make this public enough, political enough, they might back down. For the next 2 weeks, they prepared with military precision. Jonathan coordinated despite the constant pain in his leg from the old injury. Every successful treatment was documented. Former patients wrote testimonials. The Cherokee Council passed resolutions. Even some of the townspeople who'd once opposed them now wrote letters of support. But when the commission arrived, Evelyn's heart sank. Leading it was Professor Aldrich, the same man who'd tried to kidnap Samuel Thomas years before. With him were 2 Bureau officials, and surprisingly, a woman, Dr. Margaret Hayes, one of the first female physicians licensed in the territory. Mrs. Mercer, Aldrich said with a cold smile. Or should I say, the self-styled medicine keeper. We meet again. Professor, Evelyn replied evenly. Still trying to steal what you can't understand. I'm here on official business. This facility is operating without proper federal oversight, mixing legitimate medicine with primitive superstition. It's a public health hazard. Dr. Hayes stepped forward, her expression unreadable. I'm here to evaluate the medical practices objectively. I'll need full access to your facility's records and methods. Over the next 3 days, the commission invaded every aspect of their lives. Aldrich was obviously looking for any excuse to condemn them, while the Bureau officials seemed more interested in the valuable plants than the healing work. But Dr. Hayes was different. She observed everything with sharp intelligence, asking penetrating questions that showed real medical knowledge. On the second night, Samuel Thomas, now 11, approached Dr. Hayes privately. "You're sick," he said simply. "Have been for 2 years. The doctors in Chicago couldn't help, could they?" She stared at him. "How could you possibly? It's in your breath, your skin, the way you hold yourself. Kidney disease getting worse. You came here hoping we could help, not just to inspect." Dr. Hayes's professional composure cracked. "Can you help? I mean—" Samuel Thomas looked at his mother, who'd overheard. Evelyn made a decision that would have seemed like weakness, but was actually strategy. "Come with me," she told Dr. Hayes. She led the woman to the cave at midnight, just the two of them. Inside, surrounded by the impossible warmth and green life, Evelyn prepared a treatment she'd developed for similar cases, a combination of traditional Cherokee remedies and modern medical understanding. "This is extraordinary," Dr. Hayes breathed, looking around the cave. "The biodiversity alone, and these plants, some of them shouldn't exist in this climate at all." "They exist because this place is sacred," Evelyn explained, working carefully. "Not sacred in a superstitious way, but sacred as in set apart, protected, unique. The Cherokee have known this for generations. We're just now understanding the science behind what they always knew." Dr. Hayes took the medicine and they talked through the night, woman to woman, healer to healer. By dawn, Margaret Hayes was an ally, but Aldrich had been busy too. On the third day of the inspection, he announced he'd found evidence of fraud. "This girl," he said, pointing to Rachel, who was teaching a class. "She's a runaway from Carlisle living under a false identity. This alone is enough to shut down the facility." Rachel went pale, but before anyone could respond, Judge Harrison entered with a document. "Actually, Rebecca Crowdog received a full pardon 6 months ago, part of a general amnesty for former boarding school students. She's here legally." "How convenient," Aldrich sneered. "Forged documents, no doubt." "Are you accusing a federal judge of forgery?" Harrison asked mildly. "Because that's a serious charge." The confrontation might have escalated, but that's when Catherine Singing Bird, now 10, ran in crying. "Mama, Papa, the cave, something's wrong with the cave." They all rushed to the sacred site where they found the spring water had turned dark, almost black. The plants were wilting and the air smelled of sulfur. "What did you do?" Evelyn demanded, turning on Aldrich. "Nothing. We haven't even inspected the cave yet." Samuel Thomas knelt by the water, then jerked back. "Poison. Someone's poisoned the spring upstream." Jonathan was already moving despite his limp. "If someone's contaminated the water source, it could affect the whole valley's water supply, not just the cave." The next hours were desperate. Jonathan led a team upstream searching for the contamination source. Evelyn and Samuel Thomas worked frantically to save the dying plants, many of which were irreplaceable. Dr. Hayes threw her official weight around demanding resources from the town. They found at 2 miles upstream barrels of industrial waste that had been dumped into a feeder creek. The barrels bore the mark of a mining company owned by Wilson, the man who'd led the Protective Association. "He's trying to destroy the cave since he couldn't burn the hospital," Rachel said furiously. But the damage was already severe. Many of the rarest plants were dead or dying. The spring would need months to clear even with intervention. It was catastrophic, not just for the hospital, but for everyone who depended on the medicines. That's when Susan Mary remembered something. Grandmother Singing Bird's map, the sister caves. If this one is poisoned, maybe we can find another. It was desperate, possibly futile, but they had no choice. While Jonathan coordinated the cleanup effort and Evelyn tried to save what plants she could. Susan Mary and Samuel Thomas studied the symbols grandmother Singing Bird had left them. Here, Samuel Thomas said suddenly, pointing to a symbol that seemed to pulse under his touch. It's not far, maybe 30 miles north. I can feel it calling. Dr. Hayes insisted on coming with them, along with Thomas running elk and several Cherokee warriors. The journey took them into hills that were supposedly barren, worthless land that nobody had claimed. But Samuel Thomas led them unerringly to a crack in a cliff face that looked like nothing special until you saw it from the right angle. Inside was another cave smaller than theirs, but equally impossible warm springs plants that shouldn't exist that same sense of sacred presence. But this one was different too. Where their cave felt welcoming, protective, this one felt wild, dangerous. It's been alone too long, Susan Mary said, understanding intuitively. No keeper, no bridge between it and the world. It's gone feral. They gathered what medicines they desperately needed, but carefully, respectfully. The cave seemed to test them, making them prove their worth. Dr. Hayes was amazed, her scientific mind racing to understand phenomena that defied explanation. When they returned, they found the situation had deteriorated. Aldrich was using the poisoning to argue the site was compromised unsafe. Several patients at the hospital had worsened without their regular medicines. And Wilson had disappeared, likely fled to avoid prosecution. But Dr. Hayes had seen enough. She stood before the full commission and delivered her report. This facility represents the most advanced integration of traditional and modern medicine I've ever witnessed, she said firmly. The recent sabotage only proves how valuable and threatened this knowledge is. I recommend not only full federal protection, but expansion of the program. Aldrich spluttered. You've been compromised. They've clearly influenced you. They've saved my life, Dr. Hayes said simply. I came here dying, though I hid it well. The treatment I received last night has already improved my condition more than 2 years of conventional medicine. If that's influence, then yes, I've been influenced by competence and compassion. The Bureau officials were swayed by Dr. Hayes' medical credentials. Aldrich raged, but he was outvoted. The commission recommended continued operation under current management with federal protection against future sabotage. But the victory felt hollow. The cave was healing slowly, but many plants were gone forever. The knowledge grandmother Singing Bird had passed down about their specific uses was now partially theoretical, unable to be practiced. We need to find all the sister caves, Evelyn said that night her family gathered around her. Preserve their knowledge before something happens to them too. That's a lifetime's work, Jonathan pointed out. Then it's good we have 3 children to carry it on, Evelyn replied, looking at each of them. Susan Mary with her gift for languages and cultural bridge building. Samuel Thomas with his unprecedented healing abilities. Catherine Singing Bird with her fierce spirit and intuitive understanding of the natural world. Over the following months, they developed a plan. The hospital would continue operating, but they would also send expeditions to find and protect the sister caves. Dr. Hayes. Her health restored, became a powerful advocate in Washington, helping secure funding for what they called the Indigenous Medicine Preservation Project. Rachel took over much of the teaching, having developed into a skilled educator who could navigate both worlds with hard-won wisdom. She'd married Thomas Running Elk's nephew, and their children were growing up truly bicultural, as comfortable in Cherokee ceremony as in a white classroom. But new challenges arose. The country was changing, industrializing. The railroad finally came through the valley, bringing more settlers, more development. The town grew into a city pressing against their boundaries. One day a young man arrived at the hospital well-dressed and carrying a medical bag. He was clearly mixed race with features that suggested Cherokee ancestry, but skin light enough to pass for Mediterranean. I'm looking for Samuel Thomas Mercer, he said. Samuel Thomas, now 15 and already taller than his father, stepped forward. I'm him. My name is David Crow Feather. I believe your grandmother and mine were sisters. The revelation opened new connections. David had been raised in California, his family having fled there during the removal. He'd become a doctor trained at the University of California, but had always felt the pull of his heritage. I've been having dreams, he admitted, about caves, about plants that glow, about songs in a language I don't speak but somehow understand. My grandmother said if I ever had such dreams, I should find the medicine keeper. It was becoming clear that the caves were awakening, calling to those with the bloodline gift. Over the next year, 3 more young people arrived with similar stories, descendants of medicine keepers scattered by removal and war drawn back by dreams and instinct. Evelyn realized they were witnessing something unprecedented, the reconstitution of a medicine circle that had been broken for generations. Each newcomer brought fragments of knowledge, songs, and practices that had been preserved in isolation. Together they were rebuilding something that was more than the sum of its parts. But not everyone was pleased by this gathering. A new movement was arising more sophisticated than Wilson's crude racism. They called themselves the American Purity League, and they had powerful backers in Washington. Their leader was a senator named Carlisle who believed in scientific racism, in the superiority of Anglo-Saxon blood. "They're creating a mongrel aristocracy," he declared in Congress, using supposed ancient knowledge to claim authority over real Americans. The attacks this time were legal bureaucratic, challenges to land titles, investigations into citizenship status, attempts to regulate the hospital out of existence. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. Jonathan, despite his worsening limp, traveled to Washington to fight back. But he returned with grim news. "They're going to pass the Curtis Act," he said. "It'll break up all tribal governments' force allotment, even on the exempted lands. Everything we've built could be destroyed." The family gathered in the slowly healing cave to discuss options. The water ran clearer now, many plants had regrown, but it would never be quite what it was before the poisoning. "We could fight it in court," Susan Mary suggested. She'd been studying law through correspondence courses, preparing for battles she saw coming. "We could go public, really public," Samuel Thomas added. "Make our story so well known that destroying us would be political suicide." Or, Catherine Singing Bird said quietly, "We could hide. Spread out, go underground, preserve the knowledge in secret until the world is ready for it." It was Evelyn who made the decision. "We do all three. We fight openly where we can. We spread the knowledge to those ready to receive it, and we prepare secret repositories for what might be lost." The next 2 years were a whirlwind of activity. Susan Mary filed lawsuit after lawsuit using every legal tool available. Samuel Thomas and David Crow Feather published medical papers that brought international attention to their work. Catherine Singing Bird, showing unexpected talent for organization, created a network of safe houses and secret gardens where medicinal plants could be preserved. Jonathan built hidden rooms and buildings throughout the growing town, places where documents and seeds could be stored safely. His carpentry skills, refined over decades, created hiding spots that wouldn't be discovered for generations. Rachel wrote everything down, creating multiple copies of every piece of knowledge, every story, every song. She'd learned from her boarding school experience that written records, however imperfect, were better than lost oral traditions. Mrs. Ashford, now in her 80s but still sharp, used her remaining influence to create a trust fund that would support the work even if the government seized the land. She'd become like a grandmother to the Mercer children, her initial prejudice long since replaced by fierce protectiveness. Catherine would be proud, she told Jonathan one of her last visits. "You've built something worthy here, different from what she might have imagined, but worthy nonetheless." The crisis came to a head in 1893. The Curtis Act passed, and federal agents arrived to enforce it. But they found the entire valley united against them: Cherokee and white ranchers and townspeople, even some of the railroad workers who'd been helped by the hospital. The standoff lasted 3 days. Telegraph lines hummed with messages to Washington. Newspaper reporters from as far as New York came to cover it. The federal agents faced with the prospect of another wounded knee, but with white citizens on the Indian side, hesitated. That hesitation was enough. A telegram arrived from the president himself granting a special exemption. The hospital and its associated lands would remain under their current structure, a unique entity neither fully white nor fully Indian, but something new. "We won," Rachel said, hardly believing it. "This battle," Evelyn corrected. "The war continues." She was right. Over the following years, they faced challenge after challenge. The Spanish-American War brought requests for their medicines for soldiers. The growing eugenics movement targeted them as examples of dangerous race mixing. The discovery of oil on nearby lands brought new pressures to sell or lease their property. But they endured, adapted, evolved. Susan Mary became the first woman of known Cherokee descent to argue before the Supreme Court. Samuel Thomas's medical innovations, combining traditional and modern techniques, saved thousands during the influenza pandemic. Catherine Singing Bird's network of medicine keepers spread across the continent, each protecting local knowledge while staying connected to the whole. Jonathan's body finally betrayed him completely in the winter of 1901. Years of hard work and old injuries caught up, leaving him bedridden. But his mind remained sharp, and he spent his last months teaching his grandchildren Susan Mary's twin boys, Samuel Thomas's daughter, Catherine's adopted Cherokee orphans. Everything he knew about building things to last. "I was just supposed to deliver a letter," he told Evelyn one evening, the firelight dancing across his weathered face. "One simple task for a dying man's wish. Look what you turned it into." "We turned it into," she corrected, holding his calloused hand. "None of this would exist without you." "It would. Different, maybe, but you'd have found a way. You're the strongest person I've ever known, Evelyn Carter Mercer. It's been an honor to stand beside you." He died as he'd lived quietly without fuss, surrounded by the family they'd built together. The funeral brought hundreds of mourners, people whose lives he'd touched without seeking credit or recognition. Standing by his grave, Evelyn felt the weight of continuing alone. But Susan Mary took her right hand, Samuel Thomas her left, and Catherine Singing Bird stood behind her, solid as the mountains themselves. "He's not gone," Samuel Thomas said softly. "Every building he made, every person he helped, every moment of beauty he created, it all continues." The cave seemed to agree. That night, for the first time since the poisoning, the phosphorescent plants glowed as bright as they had when Evelyn first saw them. The water sang with new voices, and in the deepest chamber another passage had opened. Inside they found carvings Jonathan had made during his last mobile months, the entire story of their lives together told in wood and stone. But at the very end was something none of them had seen before: a map to more sister caves, dozens of them, with notes in his careful handwriting about how to find and protect each one. "He was still building," Catherine Singing Bird said wonderingly. "Even at the end, he was building our future." The 20th century dawned with electric lights beginning to appear in the valley automobiles, startling horses on the old roads. The world was speeding up, changing in ways that would have seemed like magic to those who'd fought wolves in the snow just 20 years before. But in the cave, time moved differently. The ancient plants grew at their own pace, the water remembered songs from before human memory, and the knowledge passed from keeper to keeper remained unbroken. Evelyn stood in that timeless space, her hair now more gray than black, and felt the presence of all who'd come before Susan Crow. Feather, Samuel Carter, Mary Jonathan, Grandmother, Singing Bird. "We're ready," she said aloud, though whether to the past or the future she wasn't sure. Her children and grandchildren fanned out across the country, finding and protecting the sister caves, building bridges between worlds that seemed increasingly divided. Some of the keepers became famous doctors. Others remained anonymous healers. Some fought in courts and Congress. Others worked quietly in communities that needed them most. The hospital grew into a medical college, attracting students from around the world. The town, now a small city, prided itself on being the birthplace of integrated medicine. The cave became a pilgrimage site for healers, though its exact location remained secret, protected by law and tradition and the fierce devotion of those who understood its value. Evelyn lived to see automobiles replace horses, airplanes cross the sky, radio waves carry voices across impossible distances. Through it all, she maintained the bridge between worlds, teaching anyone who would listen that healing knew no color, wisdom knew no single source, and the sacred could be found wherever people were brave enough to protect it. On her last day at 93, the same age as Grandmother Singing Bird, she sat by the spring in the cave, surrounded by 5 generations of her family. The water was crystal clear now, the plants lush and abundant, the warmth as welcoming as ever. "The work isn't finished," she said, her voice still strong despite her age. "It never will be. Each generation must build their own bridges, fight their own battles, protect what matters in their own way. We will," Grandmother promised her newest great-grandchild, a girl with Jonathan's gray eyes and Susan Crow Feather's proud cheekbones. "We'll keep building." Evelyn smiled, remembering a scared young woman fighting wolves in a blizzard, never imagining the journey that single night would begin. She thought of Jonathan, surely waiting for her somewhere beyond, patient as always. She thought of all the lives saved, all the bridges built, all the knowledge preserved. "Good," she said simply. That's good. As the sun set over the Montana mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, the cave began to sing not just the water, but the very stones themselves, harmonizing in frequencies that touched something deep in human consciousness. It was greeting and farewell celebration and promise and ancient voice acknowledging that its keepers had proven worthy that the sacred trust would continue. The sound carried across the valley, and for just a moment, everyone stopped what they were doing to listen. Cherokee and white, young and old, believer and skeptic, all heard something that reminded them of what it meant to be connected, to be part of something larger than individual existence. In that moment, the bridge was complete. Not finished, it would never be finished, but complete in the way a river is complete, even as it flows, in the way a song is complete, even as it's being sung. The work would continue, the challenges would evolve, the bridges would need constant tending. But the foundation was solid, built by hands that knew both how to fight and how to heal, maintained by hearts that understood both tradition and change, protected by spirits that honored both the ancient and the new.